The autumn wind swept across the town of Emberstead, rustling the crimson leaves that clung stubbornly to the trees lining the academy courtyard. Kael Emberhart adjusted the collar of his uniform and exhaled slowly, watching his breath fog into the morning air. Today was the awakening. It wasn't a holiday, not exactly, but it might as well have been. Shops closed early. Families gathered. And students, one by one, stepped into the awakening chamber to learn whether they were ordinary, or something more. Kael stood at the back of the line with his hands in his pockets, swaying slightly on his heels. The marble archway that led into the chamber glowed with faint symbols, etched runes pulsing in rhythm with the planet's mana. A soft hum surrounded the building like a heartbeat. "Next," called Instructor Varen, his voice clipped and precise. The boy in front of Kael gave a nervous nod before stepping into the chamber. The doors closed behind him with a hollow echo. Kael glanced around. He knew most of the students here. Many were nobles or children of prominent guild members. He wasn't. Just Kael from Ember Lane, son of a blacksmith and a seamstress. He hadn't expected anything from today. He didn't even expect to awaken. Still, part of him hoped. Kael Emberhart. The voice shook him from his thoughts. He blinked and stepped forward. The doors closed behind him. The awakening chamber was a large circular hall built of polished obsidian and glowing crystal veins. At its center stood a pedestal, upon which floated a translucent mana core the size of a pumpkin, pulsing faintly with orange light. The walls shimmered with swirling runes, reflecting every breath and heartbeat back with eerie clarity. "Initiate the connection," Instructor Varen said from behind a crystalline barrier, his expression unreadable. Kael stepped up to the pedestal. He hesitated for only a second before raising his hand and placing it on the orb. The world fell silent. In that moment, Kael's senses were pulled inward. He felt heat. No, not just heat. A roaring inferno, wild and ancient. His vision blurred, and he saw himself standing in a field of ash and flame. Towers crumbled in the distance, and red sky cracked with embers. A voice echoed, not words, just a vibration that rang through his bones. Then the heat surged into him. Kael screamed. His body jerked backward as a blast of flame erupted from the orb, sending waves of heat through the chamber. Alarms flared. The crystal barrier flickered. Instructor Varen shielded his eyes, then moved quickly to stabilize the core. When the flames receded, Kael collapsed to one knee, gasping. Smoke curled from his clothes, but he was unharmed. The orb now glowed red-hot. Varen stared at him, unblinking. Flame affinity, but not just that. He approached cautiously and extended a scan crystal over Kael's chest. "Spell amplification trait," he murmured, then louder, his magic outputs at maximum possible amplification by default. Every spell, fully charged. Kael blinked up at him, still catching his breath. "Is that good?" Varen didn't answer immediately. "It's rare. Powerful. But incredibly dangerous," he finally said. "You'll burn through your mana reserves 10 times faster than normal casters. One mistake and you could incinerate yourself." Kael nodded slowly. "Sounds like I'll have to learn quickly then?" Varen stared for another moment, then gave a short nod. "You'll be assigned a combat advisor. You're not allowed to cast unsupervised for now." "Understood." Kael stood shakily but with a grin. "Understood." By the time Kael stepped out of the chamber, the courtyard had thinned out. Word had already spread. He caught glances, some curious, some wary. His friend Merrick ran over from the benches. "Holy crap, Kael. Did you melt the walls in there?" Kael rubbed the back of his neck. "Not all of them. Just a little sizzle." "You're a flame mage?" Marek's voice rose with excitement. Kael gave a small shrug. "Guess so. But it's different. My spells come out too strong. I need to be careful." "Too strong? That sounds amazing. Man, you're gonna be rich off dungeon course. Flame users always top the charts." Kael smiled, but his thoughts lingered on the vision he'd seen. That world of fire. The voice. The feeling like something ancient had looked straight into him. He wasn't sure what that meant. Later that evening, Kael walked alone along the riverbank path that curved behind the academy. The town lights shimmered on the water. He needed space to think. Most of the others were probably celebrating their awakenings at the Plaza Tavern, but Kael didn't feel like joining just yet. He stopped near an old training post and stared up at the stars. Flame Mage. Amplification trait. It sounded powerful on paper, but what if he burned out too fast? What if he lost control? There was a reason this trait wasn't known or widely used. Maybe no one had survived long enough to make it known. He opened his hand, feeling for mana. It stirred easily. Too easily. With just a flicker of will, fire danced along his fingertips. But even that minor spark flared bright enough to light the path around him. He closed his palm and let it fade. He would have to train. Not just cast, but learn control, restraint, precision. He wasn't handed greatness. He'd been handed something sharp. And he would need to learn how to hold it without bleeding. The next morning, Kael packed his things and left home early. He needed money to afford spell scrolls and training tools, and the fastest way was simple. Dungeons. He stood before the gates of a level 1 feral cavern at the town outskirts. Rusted sword at his back, a cheap mana potion in his pocket, and a determined fire in his chest. The guards eyed him skeptically as he signed the solo entry waiver. "You sure you're ready, kid?" one of them asked. Kael nodded. "No one's ever ready. But I'm going in anyway." He stepped past the gate, the stone tunnel yawning wide before him, and took his first step into the world beyond safety. The entrance to the feral cavern stood like the maw of a slumbering beast. Jagged stone teeth framed the opening, damp and cracked with moss. A faint wind drifted out from within, carrying the scent of earth, iron, and something acrid. Kael took a breath and stepped into the shadows. The tunnel narrowed just a few meters in. Cold stone closed in around him, and the outside world faded behind a bend. As soon as his boots crossed the threshold, a quiet chime echoed, his dungeon permit activating. Lines of faint blue light pulsed underfoot, tracking his progress. He kept walking. One hand hovered near the hilt of his short sword, but his focus stayed inward, on the mana pooling behind his heart. It was always there now, warm, vibrant, and eager to ignite. He couldn't afford to let it flare up unintentionally. He needed to pace himself. A few more steps and the tunnel opened into the first chamber. The cavern was dim, lit only by the glowing fungi clinging to the walls. Stalactites hung from above like icy fangs. Across the room, near a pile of bones and shattered gear, two creatures stirred, feral crawlers. Dog-sized, furless beasts with stretched skin, blind eyes, and claws that clattered against the stone. Kael crouched low and exhaled slowly. This was it. His first real fight. He extended one hand and gathered mana into his palm. Just a spark. Just enough to scare them. Flame gathered instantly, more than he intended. The small fireball surged in size, flickering wildly. He clenched his jaw and tried to compress it down, but the spell resisted. Sweat beaded on his brow. One of the crawlers shrieked and lunged. He had no choice. Ignite. The fireball shot forward. It hit the ground beneath the crawler with a boom, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The creature's body was engulfed in flames and thrown against the cavern wall. Smoke billowed. The second crawler froze, then turned to flee. Kael tried to summon another small flame, but his mana surged again. This time, the spell burst in his hand before he could cast. He stumbled backward, his palm burning. Not physically, just overstrained. The light from his own magic painted his face in amber. The crawler vanished into a crevice. Kael stood there, breathing hard. The fight had lasted only seconds, but his mana was already dropping fast. He approached the remains of the burned crawler. A faint glow remained, a dungeon core. He knelt and picked it up, the surface pulsing with captured energy. One down. Many more to go. He moved deeper into the cave. The second chamber was larger, with shallow pools of water collecting in low dips. Strange insects skittered across the surface, leaving ripples behind them. Kael stepped carefully around the edge, alert for movement. A sharp screech rang out from above. 3 crawlers dropped from the ceiling. Kael rolled backward just in time, barely avoiding a claw that scraped the stone where he'd stood. "Okay," he muttered, standing and raising both hands. "Control this time." He tried a flame lash, something simple. The mana surged. He could feel it spiraling into a larger form than he intended, so he focused hard on minimizing the release. This time, the fire came in a tight whip, slashing sideways in an arc. It caught 2 of the crawlers mid-lunge, knocking them into the wall. The third scrambled away, hissing. Kael stepped forward and slashed with his sword, finishing the nearest crawler. One remained. It hissed and darted behind a rock. Kael's breath was shallow. He called the flame again. This time he channeled it into a cone, wide, forward, short range. His body trembled as the fire grew in his palms, but he held it steady. Burn. A wave of flame poured out, rolling across the cavern floor. The hidden crawler shrieked as the fire found it. Kael lowered his arms and leaned on one knee, panting. That had been too much. Again. He pulled out the cheap mana potion and drank half. It tasted like bitter herbs and iron, but the relief was instant. The fire behind his ribs cooled slightly. He collected 2 more cores. After 2 more rooms, Kael sat against a rock and rested. Around him, the air shimmered faintly from residual heat. The stone beneath him had blackened in patches. His robes were singed at the edges. His mana was low and the potion's effect was fading. Still, he had 3 cores in his pouch. Not bad for a first solo run. But as he looked deeper into the final tunnel, a low rumble reached his ears. The boss room. Normally a party would take it on. But Kael had no party. He could leave now and sell the cores he had. That alone would get him a few silver, enough for a new scroll, maybe even better gloves for channeling. Still, something pulled at him. It wasn't pride exactly or recklessness. It was a whisper, one that echoed from the vision he'd seen during his awakening. Fire wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to be tested. He stood slowly and approached the final gate. The magic array shimmered as he stepped into the circle. The stone doors slid open with a grinding groan. He entered the boss chamber. The room was vast and round with a cracked platform in the center. Atop it stood a massive beast, a feral crawler alpha. Nearly 3 meters tall with a blackened carapace and molten veins running across its chest. Its breath steamed in the cold air. It saw him. And it charged. Kael's heart pounded. He didn't try to cast right away. He waited, sidestepped the first lunge, then slid across the floor to a nearby column. He could only afford one big spell. So he'd make it count. He reached for the deepest core of his magic, feeling the heat pulse behind his heart like a sleeping dragon. He began to chant, not because he needed to but to pace himself. Kindle, build, focus. The mana built rapidly. His vision swam from the intensity. The beast roared and stomped toward him. Kael stood firm. Crimson Lance. The spell launched with a thunderous crack. A spear of flame, white-hot at the tip, exploded from his hand and streaked across the chamber. It struck the alpha square in the chest. The creature screamed. For a moment the entire chamber filled with light and heat. Then silence. Smoke drifted upward. The boss collapsed in a heap, steaming. Kael dropped to one knee, drained. But alive. Minutes later he exited the dungeon. The afternoon sun was just starting to dip toward the horizon. He blinked against the brightness and walked slowly toward the guild checkpoint. The guards looked up, surprised. You made it out? Kael gave a tired smile and held up the boss core. Yeah. Took some warming up. They stared at him in disbelief as he passed. Behind him, the dungeon gate sealed with a hum. Kael walked down the dirt road back toward town, the core still warm in his hand. And the fire within him burned brighter than ever. The marketplace of Emberstead bustled with late morning energy. Stalls lined the cobblestone street, overflowing with herbs, leather gear, mana crystals and glimmering enchantment scrolls. The scent of roasted meat mingled with incense smoke from a nearby shrine, and hawkers shouted their latest deals. Kael made his way through the crowd, his pouch of silver coins bouncing lightly against his hip. He had exchanged his dungeon cores at the local guild just an hour ago. The guild staff had raised eyebrows at the boss core he'd brought back, but said little beyond a polite congratulations. He had earned enough to buy a few beginner spell scrolls, and hopefully something to help him stabilize his casting. His eyes scanned the signage until they settled on a stall beneath a red awning marked Elrond's Arcane Goods. He stepped up. The vendor, an elderly woman with glowing tattoos along her arms, looked him over with a sharp eye. "You're the boy with the unstable fire, aren't you?" she asked without preamble. Kael blinked. Word travels fast. Especially when a lone student nearly turns a beginner dungeon into a kiln, she said, then grinned. Come. Let's find something before you burn your own face off. He followed her behind the counter where wooden crates were filled with rolled scrolls, crystals, and thin gloves stitched with magic-threaded runes. Focus gloves, she said, lifting a pair of black leather gloves etched with dull red lines. They won't reduce your amplification, but they'll give your fingers better mana control. Less accidental explosions. Kael slipped them on. They fit snugly, and his fingers tingled as the enchantment activated. I'll take them. He also picked up a basic spell scroll. Flame Coil, a utility binding spell designed to wrap around enemies without killing them outright. He needed more than just raw damage. After paying and thanking her, he stepped back onto the street, scroll tucked in his bag, and headed toward the training fields on the edge of town. The Emberstead training ground sat near the cliffs beyond the southern road. There, the landscape opened into flat stone fields where rune markers glowed faintly beneath the surface, designed to absorb spell shock and resist damage. It was quiet today. Most students trained in groups or under supervision. Few came alone. Kael set his bag down beside a weathered stone and stepped into the center of the ring. The gloves helped. He could already feel it. He began with small sparks, keeping them stable, letting the fire dance between his fingers like liquid sunlight. He cycled through 3 castings of fire bolt, adjusting his output with each attempt. On the 4th try, the bolt remained compact, no violent flaring. Better, he muttered. But the real test would be Flame Coil. He unrolled the scroll and placed his palm over the center glyph. It pulsed and knowledge flowed into him like ink into water. Spell pattern, shape, rhythm. He stepped back and imagined a target. Mana rose, spiraling up his arms, and he shaped it. Flame Coil. A twisting ring of fire lashed out, curling through the air. At first, it spiraled wide, uncontrolled, but he shifted his weight, focused on his fingers, and compressed the shape. The coils tightened. They struck the rune pillar he'd chosen as a stand-in for an enemy. It flared with a faint heat glow. Kael lowered his hands, breathing hard. The spell had worked. Rough around the edges, but it hadn't exploded. Progress. Hours passed as Kael trained. Sweat soaked through his shirt and smoke lingered in the air around him. His mana was low again, but each casting felt a little smoother. The gloves absorbed some of the recoil. His body was learning how to brace for his own strength. He had just collapsed to the grass for a break when he heard footsteps approaching. "Been watching you for the past half hour," a calm voice said. Kael opened one eye and sat up slowly. A tall figure stood at the edge of the field, Aaron Veilwind, elven features sharp, bow slung casually across his back, his pale green cloak fluttering in the breeze. "I saw your name on the guild board," Aaron said, stepping closer. "You took down a feral alpha alone?" Kael nodded. "Yeah. Nearly passed out after." "That checks out." Kael grinned. "I was just about to lie and say it was easy." "Don't," Aaron said. "You'll regret it when the next fight doesn't go your way." He knelt beside Kael and pulled a flask from his belt, offering it. "Manamix. Tastes like mud, works like gold." Kael took it, drank and coughed. "You weren't lying about the taste." "I never do." They sat quietly for a moment. "Why'd you come?" Kael asked. "I wanted to see the fire mage who nearly lit a dungeon on fire." "Also," Aaron leaned back, "I'm scouting a team. Not for permanent bonding but for dungeon contracts." Kael glanced over. "You're inviting me?" "I'm inviting you to train with me for a few days. See if we can work together." Kael tilted his head. "Why?" "Because flame is strong," Aaron said simply. "But strength without aim burns everyone around it. I want to see if yours can be directed." Kael let out a breath. "All right. I'm in." Later that afternoon, they moved to the deeper range, a rocky cliffside where spellcasters practiced dangerous abilities. "Hit me," Aaron said, moving up to a training dummy. Kael frowned. "What?" "You heard me. Cast at me. A real attack. I need to know how fast it moves." Kael hesitated. "I could seriously hurt you." Aaron smiled slightly. "Not if you trust yourself." Kael gritted his teeth and summoned fire to his hand. Fire bolt. The spell surged, but he kept it compact, focused, directed. It launched toward Aaron's shoulder. At the last second, Aaron moved. His body twisted, the wind catching his cloak, and the arrow of flame barely grazed the target. "Faster than I thought," Aaron murmured. Again. They continued for over an hour. Aaron moved through each spell with precise steps, observing angles, speed, delay. He never returned fire. When they paused, Kael collapsed on a boulder, sweat soaking his back. "You're holding back," Aaron said quietly. Kael looked up, exhausted. "I have to. If I don't, I might go too far." Aaron crouched beside him. "Then we'll train until you can go all out without fear." Kael looked at him. And for the first time he realized someone didn't just fear his flame. Someone wanted to help him sharpen it. The morning sky over Emberstead shimmered with pale gold, dew glistening on rooftops and garden walls. Kael adjusted the straps on his shoulder pack and fastened his new gloves a little tighter. Today wasn't solo. Today was his first dungeon run with a party. He met Aaron at the Eastern Guild Plaza, where groups of adventurers huddled around quest boards, debating which dungeons had the best rewards and lowest risks. Kael's eyes swept the crowd as he approached, noting the mix of armor, cloaks, staves and blades. He still felt like an outsider here. Aaron stood beside a tall dwarf polishing a round iron shield, and a slim girl in silver-accented robes. Both turned to Kael as he arrived. Aaron spoke first. "Kael, meet the rest of today's test party. This is Doran Flintforge, our tank. And Lyra Moonveil, support caster." Doran looked up, then grinned and extended a heavy gauntlet. "So you're the flame boy. Heard you nearly cooked a dungeon solo. Not bad for your first ride." Kael shook his hand and winced. "Still feeling the burn, trust me." Lyra gave a small nod, eyes calm but curious. "Your mana output's unstable, right?" Kael nodded. "Trying to get a grip on it." "Good," she said softly. "Just don't cast near me without warning." Doran laughed. That's her way of saying she cares. Kael offered a crooked smile. "Got it." Aaron turned and led them down the side path toward the guild-approved transit carriage waiting at the edge of town. It was drawn by two black-furred tusk beasts and emblazoned with silver sigils, standard for official dungeon trips. They climbed aboard, and the vehicle lurched into motion, wheels creaking over dirt as they headed east toward the Mossglen Caverns, a beginner dungeon marked for team training. Kael looked out the window as the trees passed. "So how long have you three been running together?" Aaron replied without turning. "We haven't. This is everyone's first time as a full group." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Then why test it on a dungeon?" "Because dungeons reveal the truth," Aaron said. "You can't fake rhythm when things go wrong." Lyra added quietly, "The guild calls this kind of run a party trial. No bonds, no contracts. Just see if we survive together." Doran grinned. "Don't worry. If things go south, I'm the type to drag everyone out kicking and screaming." Kael nodded. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was honest. By midday, the carriage stopped at the forest clearing where the Mossglen Caverns opened beneath a moss-draped cliff. A gentle wind stirred the ferns. Nearby, a carved stone marker pulsed with faint runes, confirmation that the dungeon was cleared for entry. They disembarked and checked their gear. Kael flexed his fingers inside the gloves. Aaron notched a single arrow and tested its balance. Doran pulled his shield onto his arm with a grunt. Lyra stood still, eyes closed, quietly muttering an incantation. A faint shimmer of light traced across her skin, settling like invisible armor. "Ready?" Eren asked. They all nodded. Together they entered the cavern. Inside, the tunnel descended in a smooth slope, damp walls lit by glowing moss. The first room opened into a wide space, water trickling from the ceiling in soft drips. 3 goblin scouts loitered near a broken pillar, one clutching a rusty dagger, the others holding crude crossbows. Eren motioned to the side. Doran, draw their attention. Lyra, prepare barrier. Kael, burn the left archer. The second Doran breaks in. Got it? Kael whispered, stepping behind a rock. Doran let out a booming shout and charged forward, shield raised. The goblins shrieked and raised their weapons. Lyra extended a hand. Veil of light. A shimmering dome flickered over Doran just as the first bolt hit. It ricocheted off harmlessly. Kael summoned a fireball, aiming at the leftmost goblin. The mana surged, larger than he wanted, but he compressed it, exhaled and released. Fire bolt. The spell streaked across the room, precise and fast. It struck the goblin square in the chest and flung it backward. The others panicked. Eren moved like wind, loosing 2 arrows in fluid motion. One struck a goblin in the shoulder, the second took the last one through the knee. Doran reached the final target and bashed it with his shield, knocking it cold. Silence returned. Well, Doran said, panting. That went smoother than expected. Lyra's eyes remained steady. The flame was well placed. Kael nodded, but his hands still trembled slightly. My control's getting better. But the size of the bolt, it was almost too much again. Eren walked over and handed him a small mana bar. Your output's going to drain you every time. Kael chewed slowly as they moved deeper into the dungeon. The next 2 chambers grew more complex. In the second, they encountered poison mist traps, forcing Kael and Eren to work together to trigger the pressure plates with ranged attacks. Lyra maintained a cleanse aura to keep the group from inhaling too much, while Doran spotted pressure glyphs in the floor and marked safe paths. In the third, they faced a group of 5 goblins, one of them a minor shaman who used mana to throw jolts of dark energy. Kael focused hard during this fight, casting 2 flame coils to bind the flanking goblins before they reached Lyra. The spell nearly overpowered again, but this time he centered his core, thinking of his breath, his weight, his balance. The coils struck true and Eren's arrows finished them. Doran intercepted the shaman with a full-body tackle, and Kael burned the staff with a single blast to stop further casting. When the room was finally still, they took a brief rest behind a pillar. Kael slumped down, wiping sweat from his brow. You didn't miss once, Lyra said, kneeling beside him. Not yet, Kael replied, breathing hard. But I came close to overheating. My fingers are tingling again. You're pacing better, Eren said from nearby. Still not ready for high-output fights, but you're learning. Kael glanced at the others. So, we passed the trial? Doran laughed. Unless you spontaneously combust in the next 5 minutes, I'd say yeah. At sunset, they emerged from the dungeon, battered but victorious. Each of them held a small pouch of cores and materials, ready to sell or trade. The air outside felt crisper than before. Kael looked at the others and smiled faintly. For the first time since awakening, he didn't feel like a liability. He felt like part of something. 2 days had passed since the party's successful dungeon trial. Kael sat at a bench beneath a sun-dappled oak tree, his new gloves resting beside him. His spellbook lay open across his lap, pages fluttering slightly in the warm breeze. The morning light poured across the training fields, and students moved between targets, conjuring spells, swinging blades and practicing footwork drills. Kael traced the rune diagram for Crimson Bloom with his finger. It was a more advanced flame technique he had purchased with a coin from the last dungeon. Unlike Fire Bolt, it was a burst spell, meant to scatter enemies in close range. High risk, high damage. He'd yet to try it. Reading again? A voice said from behind. Kael turned. Eren approached, carrying a bow and a wrapped lunch. He sat beside Kael and handed him one of the smaller food parcels. Training soon. Kael took it with a grateful nod. I was just going over the incantation order. Bloom-type spells build pressure fast. Pressure's good, Eren said simply. Pressure makes people move. Kael smiled, chewing thoughtfully. You always talk like a poet when you're about to suggest something reckless. Eren gave a faint grin. That's because I am. Kael raised an eyebrow. The Silverleaf Arena is open this afternoon, Eren said. Public duels. Free practice. No real injuries thanks to the guild's safeties. Kael blinked. You want me to duel someone? I want you to duel me. Kael paused, then laughed. You've seen me miss 3 times in a row and burn my boots. You sure about that? I need to see how you act under pressure when it's personal, Eren replied. In the dungeon you had others to rely on. In the arena it's just you. Kael looked out across the field, then down at the spellbook again. Okay, he said finally. Let's see if I can keep up with a poet with a bow. Later that afternoon, the Silverleaf Arena came into view. It wasn't a grand coliseum, just a circular stone field tucked behind the guild hall, surrounded by enchanted barriers and floating runes. Seating was limited to a few rows of benches carved into the hillside. A small crowd had already gathered. Duel days attracted students, travelers, and even merchants hoping to scout rising talent. Lyra stood at the edge of the arena, arms crossed, while Doran leaned against a bench, munching a pastry. "You too sure about this?" Lyra asked as Kael and Aaron approached the platform. "No killing," Aaron said calmly. "Standard guild duel. The barriers handle the rest." Kael stepped into the ring, boots scuffing against the enchanted stone floor. His heart pounded, not from fear but anticipation. Across from him, Aaron knocked an arrow and gave a simple nod. "Begin," the guild attendant called. Kael moved first. He summoned a flame burst, not a full attack, but a quick flare meant to obscure Aaron's vision. Fire rushed upward around his form, masking his sidestep as he veered right. Aaron didn't flinch. The arrow was already loosed. It pierced the edge of the fire veil, nearly grazing Kael's arm. He reached too fast. Kael clenched his jaw and launched a fire bolt, forcing Aaron to roll behind a projection stone. Aaron's next shot came fast, twin arrows curved through the air. Kael dove left and countered with flame coil. The spell surged again, too large. Kael focused, narrowed the shape and lashed it forward. The coil burst toward Aaron like a flaming ribbon. Aaron pivoted and ducked beneath it, but the tail end nicked his cloak, singing it slightly. The crowd murmured. Kael grinned. He was getting faster. Aaron narrowed his eyes and raised two fingers. Wind surged, kicking up dust and leaves from the arena floor. Kael shielded his eyes, but the next shot found his shoulder. The impact wasn't physical, thanks to the safety enchantments, but he felt the sharp jolt and staggered. He dropped to one knee. Aaron paused briefly, letting Kael recover. Kael stood again, this time not rushing. He inhaled slowly, pressing his mana down into a tight knot in his chest. Time to try the new spell. He whispered the chant. Crimson Bloom. The mana surged wildly. Heat blasted around him, and glowing cracks spread along the stone beneath his feet. Fire bloomed outward in an expanding circle. Aaron's eyes widened, and he dashed toward the edge of the ring. The spell detonated. A brilliant ring of flame shot outward, grazing Aaron's shoulder as he leapt clear. The heat dissipated at the edge of the arena barrier, harmlessly. Smoke rose. Kael stood in the center, panting. Aaron lowered his bow and raised one hand. Enough. The guild attendant called the match. Kael blinked. Wait, I didn't hit you. You would have, Aaron said. If it hadn't been a spar, I'd have had to counter with force. You're improving. Kael lowered his hands and the smoke faded. The audience clapped politely, some murmuring about the fire mage's control, others still wide-eyed at the explosion's reach. As the two stepped off the platform, Doran grinned and handed Kael a damp towel. That was something, fire boy. Thought you were gonna roast us all. Kael wiped his face and laughed breathlessly. Not today. But it's getting easier. Lyra nodded. You learn mid-duel. Not many can adapt that fast. Kael looked toward the arena once more. It hadn't been a win. But it had been his first real step forward. He could feel it. The flames were no longer wild strangers inside him. They were starting to listen. The sun had dipped low over Emberstead, casting long orange streaks across the cobbled streets. Kael walked the quiet road home, still warm from the afternoon duel. His bag was slung over one shoulder, and his gloves hung loosely at his waist. Every joint in his body ached, but it wasn't unpleasant. It was the ache of earned progress. The Silverleaf Arena had shown him something. He could control the flames, if not perfectly, then just enough. Aaron's praise had been brief but honest. Lyra and Doran had offered nods of approval. No overblown cheers or fireworks. But Kael didn't need those. He just needed to keep moving forward. As he reached the main bridge over the river that cut through the town, a figure stepped out from beneath a nearby tree. Cloaked in navy robes stitched with silver threads, the man stood tall, arms folded, hood shadowing his face. Kael slowed. The air shifted. Not colder, just heavier. Kael Emberhart, the man said. Kael stopped, eyebrows raised. Do I know you? No. But I know you. The man stepped forward, lowering his hood to reveal a clean-cut face, pale hair tied back, and a silver emblem pinned to his collar, the crest of a blazing sun surrounded by 5 rings. Kael's eyes narrowed. Solstice Flame Academy, he said slowly. The man nodded. Recruitment Division. Preliminary scouts are sent out ahead of the academy entrance exam to evaluate notable talents. Kael raised an eyebrow. And you think I'm notable? You're unstable, the man corrected. Dangerous. Unrefined. But you possess one of the rarest magical traits seen in decades. Amplified casting. We've seen the reports. Dungeon logs. Arena records. Guild files. Kael felt a small chill crawl across his shoulders. Right, he muttered. No such thing as privacy. You wouldn't be the first to say that, the man replied evenly. But I'm not here to scold. I'm here to offer you a proposition. Kael folded his arms. I'm listening. The solstice exam begins in 2 months, the man said. But before that, a number of candidates are handpicked for private pre-examination sessions. They're not required, but they can mean the difference between placement in the main university and being left behind. Kael frowned. Private sessions? Like extra tests, controlled simulations, combat evaluations, spell-casting refinement under high-ranking instructors. Off the books but real. And the catch. The man's expression didn't change. If you accept, you'll be expected to take on a dungeon class threat as part of the trial. Alone. Kael blinked. Alone? It will be monitored. You will not die. But it will push you to the edge of what you believe you can handle. Kael looked out over the river. Moonlight was starting to shimmer against the ripples. What happens if I pass? The man's voice dropped slightly, like it weighed more. You'll be placed into a priority bracket for Solstice Flame Academy's entrance ranking. You'll be given a provisional badge and evaluated as a serious contender to represent humanity in the next continental rotation. Kael stared at him for a long moment. Then he exhaled. Where and when? The man handed him a small, sealed scroll. Open this in private. Read it once, then burn it. Instructions are inside. If you choose to attend, you'll need to be ready in 3 days. Kael took the scroll. The man stepped back into the shadow of the tree, then paused. One more thing. Kael looked up. There are others like you being invited. Not all of them will be noble. The words hung in the air like mist. Then the man vanished into the shadows, leaving Kael alone with the river light. That night, Kael sat on the roof of his family's home, legs dangling over the edge, the sealed scroll resting on his lap. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he listened, to the wind in the trees, the quiet murmur of taverns down the street, the occasional clink of armor from passing guards. His world had already begun to shift. Dungeons, duels, discipline. And now this. An invitation wrapped in danger, hidden behind the Academy's polished emblem. He broke the seal. Inside was a map. A point in the southern woods. 3 days from now. No more instructions. Just a simple line at the bottom. You will not be guided. Find your flame alone. Kael stared at the words for a long time. Then he held the scroll out in one hand. With a whisper, a flicker of flame bloomed in his palm and the parchment caught. It burned silently, curling into ash that scattered into the night. The morning sun filtered through a thin veil of clouds as Kael made his way down the forest road, boots crunching softly over scattered pine needles. He followed the map from memory. There was no copy left. Just the path he had burned into his mind 3 nights ago. His pack was light. 1 mana potion. A second-hand flame crystal. His gloves. A water flask. And a single iron dagger strapped to his thigh in case things got too close. His spellbook remained tucked securely beneath his belt, more of a guide than a tool. He didn't rely on it anymore. The trees grew denser as he walked, branches arching overhead like ribs. Birds called distantly. The further he went, the quieter the forest became. After nearly an hour of steady walking, Kael spotted it. A break in the trees. A wide stone stairway descending into the ground, overgrown with moss and framed by broken statues of hooded figures. The trial dungeon. He stood at the top of the stairs and exhaled. There was no checkpoint here. No guards. No guild attendant or glowing signpost. This was something else. He took his first step down. The stone corridor at the base of the stairs was narrow and humid. The air clung to Kael's skin. Faint sigils glowed along the walls, flickering in time with some hidden pulse. It felt ancient, older than any of the standard dungeons around Emberstead. As Kael stepped forward, a ripple passed through the floor beneath his feet. He froze. A deep sound echoed through the stone. Then the corridor behind him closed. A wall of black crystal slid into place, sealing the exit with a hollow finality. Kael swallowed. No turning back, huh? He muttered, summoning a small flame in his palm to light the way. The corridor opened into the first chamber. 3 figures stood at its center, stone knights, each holding a sword across their chest. They were still at first. Then their eyes lit with cold blue light. Kael didn't wait. He summoned a bolt, focused it tightly, and launched it at the closest knight. The firebolt struck the stone armor and burst, sending chips of rock scattering. But the knight didn't fall. It moved forward, drawing its sword with a grinding sound. The others followed. Kael backed up quickly, recalculating. They were tougher than goblins, slow but heavy. He pivoted around a broken pillar and readied flame coil. The spell bloomed fast, too fast. He shaped it with tight movements, wrapping the flames into a narrow loop. He hurled it across the floor. It snapped around one knight's legs, binding it in place. The other 2 advanced. Kael ducked under a wide slash, rolled, and summoned a crimson spark burst, a spell he hadn't fully mastered, but it worked in short range. Flame surged outward from his palm. The explosion caught one knight square in the chest, blasting it back into the wall. The impact cracked the stone, and the light in its eyes faded. 1 down. The second knight lunged, but Kael dodged again. He had to end this quickly. His mana was draining faster than usual, the dungeon's ambient pressure was higher. He could feel it weighing on his lungs. He planted his feet and called on his core. Crimson Lance. The spell formed fast, a spear of white-hot fire. He launched it through the advancing knight's torso, piercing it cleanly. The construct shattered and fell. Only the bound knight remained. Kael approached it carefully, hand raised. Let's not waste the last of my mana. He drew his dagger and finished it with a precise strike to the crystal embedded in its chest. The glow faded. Kael stood still, panting. That had been harder than expected. And this was just the first room. He drank a quarter of his mana potion, saving the rest. Then he continued forward. The second room was a library. Not of books but of memories. Mirrors lined the walls, each one showing flickers of motion. Battlefields. Duels. Fleeting faces. Whispers. Kael walked slowly through it. He passed one mirror and saw himself, years ago, standing in his family's kitchen, laughing as his mother braided her hair beside the hearth. Another showed him training in the courtyard, alone. Then a mirror cracked as he passed, and another image flickered to life. Kael kneeling, surrounded by fire. Dozens of people lay scorched around him. His hands were shaking. His eyes wide with terror. Kael froze. No, he whispered. That didn't happen. But the mirror showed it anyway. He stepped back. The image faded. A test. Not of strength but of control. Not now, he muttered, walking faster. Not yet. The last mirror shattered as he passed and the exit opened. The third chamber was the final one. It was circular, lit by a pale green glow rising from cracks in the stone. At the center stood a lone figure, tall, cloaked in flowing robes, face hidden beneath a hood. The figure carried a long staff, and the air around them shimmered with dense mana. Kael stepped forward. I assume you're not here to give me a lecture. The figure did not respond. Then its staff rose. Kael moved instantly, dodging left as a wave of dark flames scorched the ground he'd been standing on. The spell left an eerie afterglow, green-black and cold. Dark fire? Kael summoned his own flame and cast a wide arc of crimson bloom. The figure raised a hand and caught the spell mid-air, twisting it into smoke. Kael's breath caught. It's absorbing magic. He couldn't rely on mid-range attacks. He had to get close, fast, and end it before his own magic turned against him. He sprinted forward, casting flame coil not to bind the figure, but to encircle the space around it and cut off movement. The fire wrapped the area, glowing bright. The figure raised a barrier, but Kael didn't aim directly. Instead, he dropped low and charged in through the smoke, dagger drawn. He slashed upward. The blade caught on the figure's robes, but found no flesh. Only air. The figure vanished like mist, reappearing behind him. Kael turned just in time to catch a spell blast with his shoulder. He flew backward, hitting the stone hard. The pain burned through the barrier enchantments. He forced himself up. Not fast enough. Not controlled enough. But he still had one shot left. He drew all remaining mana to his core. Crimson Lance. He aimed not at the figure's center, but at the base of its feet. The spear launched downward, exploding into a plume of fire that engulfed the floor. The blast surged upward, catching the figure in its wake before it could dodge. The chamber shook. When the smoke cleared, the figure was gone. Kael knelt in the scorched crater, chest heaving. Then, from the corner of the room, a quiet clap echoed. Kael turned. The recruiter, the same man who had given him the scroll, stood with arms crossed. Well done, he said. You didn't win cleanly. But you adapted. You survived. Kael coughed and stood slowly. Was that thing even real? The man gave a small smile. Real enough. You'll learn more about such entities at Solstice. If you pass the formal exam. He walked forward and held out a small silver token. The emblem of Solstice Flame Academy gleamed in the dim light. You've earned priority status. Kael took it. It was warm in his hand. You've proven your magic isn't just fire, the recruiter said. It's willpower. He turned and vanished into the tunnel. Kael looked at the token again. Then he limped toward the exit tunnel that had opened behind the platform. One more step. One more burn. And now, a path toward something bigger. The familiar skyline of Emberstead came into view just past midday. After a night of rest in a quiet field along the forest's edge, Kael returned by foot, still carrying soreness in his shoulders and a faint ache deep in his core. Even walking felt heavier now. The kind of weight that didn't come from injury. It came from change. The silver token from Solstice Flame Academy rested inside his shirt pocket, pressing faintly against his chest with each step. He passed the outer guard post with a tired nod. The guards offered half-hearted greetings. Most had likely heard about the closed-rank trials happening deep in the woods, but few ever spoke of them openly. The recruiters never made a show of their candidates. That was the point. By the time Kael reached the South Road, he heard it, murmurs. His name. Flickering rumors carried by students and adventurers along the streets. He slowed as he neared the plaza, drifting toward a shaded corner beneath the Guildhall's arch. A group of young mages clustered near the fountain, talking in hushed tones. He fought a trial construct solo. They say it was one of the cursed echoes. No way. Those are supposed to be for elite guilders. I heard he melted part of the dungeon floor with a lance spell. Burned right through the boss. Kael didn't speak. He moved past them quietly, stepping through the side gate that led toward the training fields. His body still ached, but his mana had recovered enough for basic practice. More importantly, he needed to see if what had changed inside him during the trial would stay. He stepped onto the practice range and raised one hand. The fire came immediately, eager but smooth. No wild surge. No burn back. He cast a small flame coil into the target dummy ahead. It wrapped evenly and held its shape. Kael smiled. He was starting to feel it. Not controlled by force but by rhythm. Still burning things, I see, came a familiar voice. Kael turned as Aaron approached, his bow slung over one shoulder. Lyra walked beside him, her cloak fluttering in the breeze. You missed the arena session yesterday, Aaron added. Doran thought you'd fled town. Kael wiped sweat from his brow. I was busy. Lyra looked at him carefully. You smell like moss and smoke. Dungeon? Kael hesitated, then nodded. A private trial. From Solstice. That caught Aaron's attention. He stopped a few steps away. They've already reached out to you? They offered me a provisional evaluation. One-on-one combat. And a choice. Aaron's expression remained unreadable for a long moment. Then he nodded. Then you're officially among the candidates now. Lyra tilted her head. Did they give you the silver token? Kael reached into his shirt and pulled it out, letting it catch the light for just a second before slipping it back. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. Then things are moving faster than expected. Kael crossed his arms. What do you mean? Lyra exchanged a glance with Aaron, then spoke softly. You're not the only one. Over the last 2 days, 5 others have received similar tokens. From different cities. Some from noble houses. Some from foreign branches of the guild. Aaron added, one of them arrived in Emberstead just this morning. A swordsman. Rumors say he trained under the Crimson Blade Order. Kael's brow furrowed. Already here? He's staying at the upper-tier guild dorms. No one knows why he came early, but word is he's already looking to challenge local candidates. Kael sighed. So it starts. Lyra stepped closer. You have strength, Kael. But that alone won't protect you. Now that you've stepped onto the list, people will try to break you before the exam begins. Kael looked down at his gloves. I don't plan to break. That evening, Kael walked the merchant quarter with Doran, who insisted on celebrating with roasted skewers and ginger beer. I'm telling ya, Doran said between mouthfuls, the real exam's gonna be a bloodbath. Not literal, of course, since they monitor it, but emotionally? Oh yeah, you'll see. Kael smiled faintly. You say that like you've seen it before. My cousin tried 3 years ago. Got into the top 50, but nearly lost a hand to some elf with a glass sword. Said the politics were worse than the monsters. Kael bit into his skewer and chewed in silence. He thought of the cloaked recruiter. Of the trial. Of the mirrors showing his fears. He thought of the voice that echoed behind his magic. The part of himself that always burned just a little too hot. Still with me? Doran asked, nudging his elbow. Kael blinked and nodded. Yeah. Just thinking. Don't think too much, Doran said. We're going dungeon running tomorrow. I signed us up for a group quest. Kael raised an eyebrow. You didn't even ask. Would you have said no? Kael sighed. No. Probably not. Doran grinned. Exactly. It's one of the deeper caverns north of town. Tier 3. Aaron said he'd join us too. Lyra's already packed. Kael took another bite. Then I guess we're moving up. Yup, Doran said, raising his mug. To fire, friends, and things that won't kill us too fast. Kael raised his own mug. The clink echoed gently across the plaza. Elsewhere, in a stone chamber beneath the Solstice Branch dormitory, a figure stood alone. Tall. Dark hair pulled into a knot. A crimson band etched with golden sigils tied around his sword hilt. He stared at a projection crystal hovering above the floor, showing a flickering image of Kael casting spells in the Silverleaf arena. So this is the one, he muttered. Behind him, a woman in white robes spoke quietly. The amplifier. Unrefined. Human-born. No noble ties. Yet selected early, the man said. Interesting. Will you challenge him? The man turned toward the wall, where a sword rested in a ceremonial stand. Eventually. First, I want to see how brightly he burns. He turned and walked from the chamber, the firelight casting long shadows behind him. Morning mist clung low over the forested hills as Kael stepped off the dirt road, following the others toward the Tier 3 dungeon known as the Hollow Vein. This dungeon was different from the small training caverns they'd cleared before. Even from the outside, Kael felt it. The air had a weight to it, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. The guild checkpoint here was stricter, with 2 guards checking each member's seal and ensuring all gear was properly logged. Kael stood beside Aaron, Doran, and Lyra near the waiting platform, checking his gloves and adjusting the strap of his spellbook pouch. Once we enter, Aaron said, his tone even, the guild's monitoring crystals can only track vital signs. No direct interference. If we hit trouble, we'll have to solve it ourselves. Kael nodded. Doran flexed his shoulders. That's fine by me. I brought extra rations. And snacks. Lyra, standing to Kael's right, clasped her hands together briefly. Remember, Tier 3 means more than just stronger monsters. Environmental traps, spell warps, and mana interference zones are common. Stay close. Kael exhaled slowly. Got it? A low chime sounded. The dungeon seal shimmered, unlocking. The gate opened. Together they stepped inside. The entrance tunnel narrowed quickly into a stone shaft that sloped downward at a gradual angle. Kael summoned a small flame orb, keeping it close to his shoulder to light the path. The walls were veined with faint green minerals, almost glowing as if the rock itself pulsed with life. After 10 minutes of silent walking, the tunnel widened into the first chamber. Dark and still. The floor was scattered with broken gear, remnants of older attempts, likely from less prepared parties. In the center, a single rune crystal floated above a stone altar, crackling faintly. As Kael stepped forward to examine it, Aaron held up a hand. Trap. Kael froze. Aaron motioned toward the far wall. A pattern of circular grooves, barely visible, looped around the edge of the room. Pressure glyphs. If you trigger them, the altar activates. Doran stepped up beside him. I can cross safely. Let me trigger it on purpose. You three get ready. Kael and Lyra exchanged a glance, then nodded. Doran took 3 slow steps forward, each one heavy and deliberate. As his boot crossed the final ring, the ground lit up. The altar flared. The crystal pulsed red. And the chamber shook. The walls split open. From the darkness emerged 2 stone widows, arachnid constructs built of bone, stone, and red mana. Their legs scraped against the floor with metallic screeches, and their glowing eyes locked instantly on the group. Positions. Aaron called, already loosing an arrow. Kael stepped wide, raising his hands. The first spider lunged toward Doran, who raised his shield and braced. The impact sent dust flying, but he held firm. Kael summoned Flame Coil, wrapping one leg of the spider and yanking it off balance. It crashed sideways, hissing. Lyra stepped forward, chanting. A faint white glow enveloped Doran, reinforcing his defense. Aaron moved into position, launching arrows in rapid bursts, each one striking a joint or exposed weak point. Kael circled left, eyes fixed on the second spider, which began climbing along the wall toward him. Too high for Flame Coil. He reached deep, building mana for a new spell. Flame Arc. A wave of fire surged upward from his palm, cutting across the wall in a sweeping blaze. The spider shrieked and fell, its legs buckling as it hit the floor. Kael followed up immediately. Crimson Lance. The spear of fire launched straight into the creature's chest, exploding on impact. The spider crumbled into ash and stone. Kael turned toward the first spider just as Doran slammed it into the altar. Aaron fired the finishing arrow into its head. Silence returned. Only the fading glow of the rune crystal remained. After a moment to breathe and regroup, Lyra healed a cut on Doran's cheek and they moved on. Kael drank half a mana potion and kept his thoughts quiet. The first fight had gone well. Too well almost. As they continued, the dungeon grew colder. The stone walls dripped with moisture, and Kael noticed their spells began to dim faster. Even his basic fire orb flickered oddly. Mana distortion zone, Lyra murmured. Something in here feeds on spell output. Wonderful, Doran said. A cave that's hungry. Kael knelt and pressed his hand to the floor. His fire flared briefly, then flickered out. We'll need to keep castings tight, he said. No big spells unless necessary. It's draining the outer layers of magic first. They proceeded carefully through the narrowing tunnels, using physical light instead of spell light when possible. Eventually they reached the next chamber. Inside, the ground was uneven and stalagmites rose in jagged rows like teeth. At the far end, a single creature waited. Tall. Humanoid. A shardling berserker, a dungeon-birth entity clad in crystal armor, with a jagged blade fused to one arm. Its eyes glowed violet. Kael's instincts flared. This one's different. It's real, Aaron said. Not a construct. And it knows we're here. The creature roared and charged. Kael dodged left as Doran met it head-on, shield raised. The impact sent a shockwave through the floor. Kael moved around the flank and cast a low-power flame coil to try and catch the creature's leg. It latched, but the berserker ripped through it with brute force. Aaron's arrows bounced off its armor. Lyra cast a light sigil, weakening its forward momentum. Kael breathed deeply, pressing a new spell forward. Ashbind. A focused loop of burning cinders wrapped around the berserker's right leg and pulled tight. It hissed, staggered. Doran seized the moment, slamming the shield into its chest. The berserker stumbled backward, just far enough for Kael to act. He unleashed a crimson bloom at close range. The fire burst in a wave, catching the enemy in a point-blank blast. This time the armor cracked. Aaron's next arrow pierced the gap in the crystal chest plate. The berserker fell with a crashing shatter. Kael stood panting, hands still warm. That one had felt real. Too real. They sat near the edge of the chamber to rest. Lyra refilled their waters using a purification crystal, while Aaron marked their current path on a map. Kael leaned against the wall, staring at the floor. "You okay?" Lyra asked, approaching. He nodded slowly. I felt it. That last one. It wasn't just a dungeon spawn. It was aware. It reacted. Lyra sat beside him. The deeper the tier, the more unstable the dungeon's core becomes. Some say they draw from old memories, fragments of warriors, lost mages, even ghosts. Kael looked down at his hands. That one moved like a person. I could see pain behind its eyes. She didn't reply immediately. Then, softly she said, "That's the cost of power in these places. The deeper you go, the more real everything becomes." Kael nodded. They sat in silence for a while longer. When they finally reached the exit gate, dusk had already begun painting the sky outside. The moment they stepped through, fresh air hit Kael's lungs like a bomb. They made their way back to the checkpoint, reported their clear, and turned in the shard cores they'd collected. A guild scribe handed Kael a stamped parchment. "Proof of clear. You've officially completed your first tier 3. Kael looked at the seal on the scroll. It wasn't just paper. It was progress. That night, as he returned home, Kael paused at the doorstep. He looked down at his gloves. Still smudged from ash. Still warm from fire. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him, the quiet of the house wrapping around him like a cloak. Tomorrow the world would move again. But tonight the fire simply rested. The wind stirred gently across the training grounds the next morning, carrying the smell of dew-soaked grass and distant wood smoke. Kael stood alone at the far end of the field, a faint flame flickering between his fingers. He wasn't casting, just feeling. Letting the heat dance across his palm, pulsing in time with his breath. Each day it grew more familiar. Each day it felt more like his own. "Impressive," came a voice behind him. "You control it like it's part of you." Kael turned. A tall figure approached across the grass, each step smooth and deliberate. His cloak was black with red trim, the colors of Solstice's elite branch. A silver clasp held it in place over a finely fitted tunic. At his side hung a thin, straight sword with a gilded hilt. The man stopped a few paces away and offered a polite bow. "Leon Varys, representative candidate for the Crimson Blade Order." Kael kept his stance relaxed but didn't return the bow. "Kael Emberhart. Just a student." Leon's smile didn't falter. "For now." Kael narrowed his eyes slightly. "You're the one who showed up early. I've heard the whispers. And I've seen yours," Leon said, gesturing casually toward the flame still hovering near Kael's hand. "You have the amplifier trait. Rare. Dangerous. Most who possess it burn out before they ever reach real training." Kael let the flame vanish. "I'm not most." "No," Leon agreed. "Which is why I'm here." He stepped closer. "I've come to issue a formal challenge." Kael blinked. "What?" Leon continued smoothly. "You and I are both entering the Solstice entrance trials. But only one of us can lead the human candidate division for the Crimson Crest faction. They want strength, poise, control." His gaze sharpened. "And they want someone who doesn't let raw power define them." Kael crossed his arms. "You want to prove something." "I want to prove that discipline outlasts destruction," Leon said. "And you, whether you mean to or not, represent the latter." The words hung there. Not angry. Not taunting. Just matter of fact. Kael felt the warmth stir again behind his ribs. "I accept," he said simply. "Name the place." "The Silverleaf Arena," Leon replied. "Tomorrow at midday. No guild oversight. Solstice observers only." Kael nodded once. Leon turned and began walking away. Just before he reached the edge of the field, he stopped. "One more thing." Kael tilted his head. "You're not the only amplifier being watched." Then he vanished down the hill path, his cloak flickering behind him like a trailing shadow. Back at the guild hall, Kael sat at a table with Aaron, Lyra, and Doran. He explained everything, the challenge, the terms, and Leon's cryptic parting words. Aaron leaned back in his seat. "That wasn't just a duel. That was a political move." Lyra tapped the edge of her cup. "He wants to humiliate you. Show that raw flame loses to refined steel." Kael shrugged. "Then I'll have to remind him that fire can cut too." Doran looked between them. "You sure about this?" "He's trained. Formal school style. Sword arts, mana-focused drills, rhythm step combat. You're a brawler compared to him." Kael grinned slightly. "Then I'll show him how fire dances." Lyra set her cup down. "You'll need a strategy. Amplifiers aren't made for drawn-out fights. If he stalls you, your mana will drain too fast." Kael nodded. "I'm not going to outlast him. I'm going to hit him hard, fast, and precisely." Aaron leaned forward. "Train with me tonight. I'll mirror sword forms while you time your spells." Doran raised his mug. And I'll bring snacks. Someone has to fuel the genius. Kael looked around the table, at the friends who had chosen to stand beside him, even before the world started noticing his name. Thanks, he said. I'll make it count. That evening, under the dim light of rune lanterns, Kael trained with Eren on the outer ring of the arena. The stone floor was marked with mock duel circles, and each step echoed faintly underfoot. Eren moved like a swordsman, fluid, sharp, fast. Kael focused on his timing, casting flame coil, fire bolt, and ash bind with quick gestures, aiming not for power but for precision. Again, Eren called. Shorter incantation. Compress tighter. Kael exhaled and tried again. Fire bolt. The flame formed instantly and launched, striking the center mark on the dummy. Better. Now mid-dodge. Move first, cast while off balance. Kael moved to the side, shifted his weight awkwardly and still managed to shape the spell. It launched wide, but it launched. He kept going. Spell after spell until his legs ached and his gloves were hot to the touch. Only when his vision blurred did Eren finally step back. You're ready, he said. Just don't hesitate tomorrow. If you do, he'll control the rhythm. Kael nodded. Then he looked up at the stars. Tomorrow was no longer just a fight. It was a statement. The next day, the Silverleaf Arena stood quiet beneath the midday sun. A small group had gathered, not a public audience but representatives. One wore solstice robes, another a guild observer's mantle. A few students stood at the edges, whispering. Kael stepped into the ring, boots tapping lightly on stone. His gloves were clean, spellbook at his side. Across from him, Leon already stood, sword at his hip, cloak folded behind him like wings. The arena steward, a quiet older woman, raised one hand. This is an unofficial duel, approved under solstice observation. No fatal strikes. No interference. The match ends when one combatant yields or is incapacitated. Begin on my mark. Kael met Leon's eyes. No words. No gestures. Only intent. The steward's hand dropped. Begin. Leon moved first. Faster than Kael expected. His sword flashed from its sheath in a silver arc. Kael ducked and countered with a flame coil, but Leon twisted mid-step and broke the line with a precise mana slash. He disrupted the cast directly. Kael cast fire bolt, fast and tight. The bolt shot low, aimed at Leon's feet. Leon leapt, blade spinning once before landing in a perfect stance. Kael pressed harder. He unleashed a crimson bloom, the flames bursting in a half circle. Leon raised a mana barrier, thin, not full, just enough to absorb the shock and strike back with a lunge. Kael stepped sideways, clipped slightly in the ribs. The burn didn't hurt, but it reminded him, this man knew exactly how much pressure to apply. Kael dropped low and cast ash bind directly into the ground. The spell burst upward, chaining Leon's ankle for a half second. It was enough. Kael raised both hands. Crimson lance. The air shimmered. Flames surged. Leon's eyes widened. He moved, but the tip of the lance grazed his shoulder, knocking him off balance. Kael followed through with a direct fire bolt, not full power, just sharp. It struck Leon's chest, forcing him back. Leon landed hard, rolled and came to one knee. He looked up, and smiled faintly. I yield. Silence fell over the arena. Then slowly the steward raised her hand. Victory, Kael Emberhart. Kael lowered his arms, heart pounding, breath shallow. Leon stood and approached. Impressive, he said. You didn't just burn wildly. You aimed with purpose. Kael nodded, still catching his breath. Fire can be more than chaos. Leon extended a hand. Kael shook it. Solstice was watching. And now the flame wasn't just seen. It was respected. The smoke of campfires curled lazily into the gray morning sky, their scents weaving through the pine-rich air. Just outside Emberstead's eastern ridge, a field of white tents spread across the flattened hillside like a patchwork of battle flags. Students, guild recruits, and academy hopefuls moved between the canvas shelters, some practicing spells, others whispering gossip from the duels and dungeon clears of the past week. This was the Camp of Embers, the official pre-exam gathering point for Solstice Flame Academy's entrance candidates. Kael stood at the edge of the encampment, a rolled travel pack over his shoulder and the silver token tucked into the folds of his inner tunic. His boots were still scuffed from the duel with Leon, and his gloves carried faint soot marks. He felt eyes on him already, not because he was loud, but because fire always drew attention, even when silent. Eren, Lyra, and Doran stood beside him, each carrying their own gear. Well, Doran said with a grin, we've officially crossed into crazy territory. So many tents I can't even count them all. Eren scanned the field. They're separated by evaluation group. Looks like we're Group Solstice East. Combat-heavy division. Lyra adjusted her shoulder bag. Which means the Academy expects most of us to burn out early. Kael exhaled and nodded. Then let's make sure we don't. They stepped into the field. Each candidate received a marked badge, enchanted for tracking during the camp sessions. When Kael approached the registration post, A stern-looking woman with a branded gauntlet pressed a glowing crystal against his palm, then passed him a thin iron tag etched with the solstice flame emblem and the number E27. "Report to your division tent," she said without looking up. "First drills begin at midday. Orientation is skipped for combat track candidates." Kael clipped the tag to his chest. A few meters away, another recruit, a tall girl in chain-wrapped robes with icy blue eyes, glanced at his tag, then moved on without a word. The tension in the camp was immediate. No smiles. No introductions. This wasn't a guild gathering or student fair. This was a proving ground. Kael found a tent marked E Division toward the southern slope of the camp. Inside, canvas walls dimmed the sunlight, and a dozen cots were arranged in tight rows. Trunks lined the sides, already half filled by other recruits. He dropped his gear beside the only empty cot left and sat down. The air smelled faintly of oil, steel, and overused mana crystals. A moment later, Aaron entered, followed by Lyra and Doran. They took the last 3 bunks. "Looks like we just made the cut-off," Doran muttered. "Any later and we'd be sleeping under a tree." Kael leaned back on his cot, eyes closed for a moment. Then the tent flap opened again. Another recruit stepped inside, his boots silent, his cloak marked with thin white chains along the seams. His eyes were a deep gold, almost glowing beneath the dim light. He scanned the room, then locked eyes with Kael. The gaze wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. Measured. Then the boy walked to his cot without a word. Aaron whispered low. "That's Rain Valkyrin. He's from the Eastern Empire. Rumor is he awakened with a sword spirit." Kael glanced over. "Sword spirit?" Lyra replied quietly, "Some rare talents can manifest a living essence inside their weapon. Usually dormant, but during trials they awaken." Kael looked back at Rain, who had begun quietly unsheathing his blade, running a cloth along its surface. He felt the same thing he had when first meeting Leon. A quiet pressure. A focus sharpened to a single point. Another rival. Midday drills were held in a clearing just east of the main camp. An instructor, a weathered man with a faded battle cape and a scar down his cheek, stood at the center of the field. "You're not here to impress us," he began, voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "You're here to survive each other. That's your test. That's your lesson." He raised one hand and a glyph burst into life behind him, casting his shadow across the grass. "Each of you will face 2 randomized opponents in front of your peers. These aren't duels. These are evaluations. We won't stop the match until we've seen what you're made of." Names began to appear on the board, glowing in pairs. Kael watched until his tag flickered into view. E27, Kael Emberhart vs E03, Juna Felshade. A girl with short, dark red hair and a violet spear stepped forward from the other end of the field. Her boots were light, her stance confident. Kael stepped into the ring. She smiled faintly. "Heard about the Crimson Lance. Let's see if you can hit a moving target." Kael smiled back. "I was thinking the same thing about your face." The crowd chuckled faintly. The signal flared. Juna moved like a blur, spear spinning low. Kael dodged the first strike and cast firebolt at her flank, but she slid beneath it, her movements more dance than sprint. She jabbed forward. Kael blocked with a summoned flame wall, the spear glancing off its surface. He stepped back, exhaled, and pushed mana forward. Ash bind. The cinders spiraled toward her legs, forcing her to leap. That was what he wanted. Midair she couldn't dodge. He launched Crimson Bloom, a sweeping wave of fire that struck her cloak and sent her crashing backward. She rolled, groaned, then raised one hand. "Enough." The instructors nodded. Kael stepped back, breathing evenly. The crowd whispered, but this time they weren't talking about rumors. They were watching reality unfold. Later that evening, Kael returned to the E Division tent, muscles tired but spirit buzzing. His second match had been closer, against a shield mage who nearly countered every one of his spells. But Kael had found an opening with a feint and sealed the round. Now, as the campfires burned and steam rose from a pot of stew near the mess tents, he sat quietly with his team. "You're in the top bracket," Aaron said, passing him a plate. "Officially ranked 3rd in the division today." Kael blinked. "Who's first?" "Rain," Lyra answered without hesitation. He dismantled both his opponents in under a minute. Didn't draw his full weapon either. Kael took a bite of stew and chewed slowly. It didn't surprise him. But it lit a small flame of determination somewhere deep. Doran yawned and leaned back. "Still, you lit up the crowd, fire boy. You've got eyes on you now. Try not to explode." Kael smiled faintly. "I'll try." Above them, the moon began to rise, casting soft light over the camp. The flames had started to stir. And in the days ahead they would only grow hotter. The bell rang across the camp at dawn, a low resonating chime that rolled over the hills like distant thunder. Kael stirred from his cot inside the E Division tent, blinking against the gray light filtering through the canvas. Around him, others were already awake, strapping on armor, checking mana packs, polishing blades. Today was no ordinary drill. Today was the elite trial, a combat simulation designed to test full party coordination under high-stakes conditions. Kael sat up, pulling on his gloves, then rolled his shoulders slowly. His muscles still ached from yesterday's sparring, but the fire inside him burned steady. Focused. Aaron stepped over from his cot, already dressed and strapping on his quiver. Team assignments were posted. We're together. Lyra too. Doran's running late. Kael stood and grabbed his spellbook. What kind of trial? Not a duel, Aaron said. Not even a standard monster encounter. It's a scenario. Lyra stepped in from outside, her cloak damp with morning mist. We're defending a captured supply post against a simulated raid. 40 minutes of survival under random threat conditions. Kael raised an eyebrow. Simulated? As in illusions? Lyra shook her head. No illusions. All summoned constructs. Physical. And they hit hard. Great, Kael muttered. So real pain. No glory. Doran arrived at last, hair still wet from a rushed wash, carrying a half-eaten bun in one hand. Did I miss the part where they tell us not to die? You just said it, Kael replied, smirking. They assembled in the central camp square, where teams gathered around instructors holding crystal-bound scrolls. Kael spotted Rain standing beside a different group, his golden eyes expressionless. Leon, too, stood among a cluster of ranked candidates. No one spoke to either of them. Kael's party stood with their designated overseer, a short woman with half her face covered in burn scars and a metallic gauntlet that clicked faintly as she turned pages in her binder. Team E27, she said. Emberhart, Veilwind, Flintforge, Moonvale. This will be a controlled trial under observation by 2 solstice examiners. You will defend the central structure of a captured forward base. You begin with limited supplies and no healer cores. Your only recovery is what you bring in or earn mid-trial. Kael nodded. Understood. She handed each of them a badge different from the last, shaped like a hexagon marked with a red crystal. This links to the simulation core. It tracks performance in real time. Damage taken, output efficiency, coordination scores. If you're incapacitated or disqualified, your badge will glow black and eject you. Don't let that happen. They were led to the outer ridge where the trial area had been set up, an old ruin framed by broken stone towers and low walls, surrounded by pine trees and fog. Their party entered through the southern arch and found crates stacked around a collapsed structure in the center. Runes marked the simulation boundaries on the ground. This is home base, Aaron said, eyeing the terrain. 2 main approach routes. One east, one west. High ground on the north ridge. Lyra stepped beside him, already conjuring a minor defensive ward on the tower's front gate. We'll want to rotate positions between waves. I can maintain a basic light shield for 10 minutes, but only once. Doran dropped his pack. I'll anchor east. If they come in tight, I can bottleneck them. Kael, you take west. Kael nodded, stepping up onto the broken stair near the western side of the ruin. He raised a hand and summoned a small orb of fire to light the ledge. The overseer's voice echoed through the crystal badge. Begin simulation. The first wave arrived within 2 minutes. 3 ward constructs, massive 4-legged beasts formed from dark crystal and bound flame, charged from the tree line. Aaron loosed 2 arrows, one striking cleanly through a construct's throat. Doran braced for impact, slamming his shield into the jaw of the second. Kael stood atop his ledge, flame building in his chest. He shaped the spell tightly. Fire bolt. The first bolt hit squarely between the eyes of the third warg, staggering it. Kael followed up with a flame coil, wrapping it around the beast's front legs, sending it crashing forward. Aaron finished it with an arrow to the core. The other 2 beasts fell seconds later. Kael exhaled. Then the next wave came, blight runners, sleek humanoid forms with claws of bone and eyes like molten coals. Faster. Smarter. Lyra cast a glyph that flared across the courtyard, slowing their approach. Kael targeted the nearest one with Ash Bind, then dropped from the ledge and rolled into a casting stance. Crimson Bloom. The explosion caught 2 runners mid-leap, burning their forms into fading sparks. Doran met the last one with a shoulder bash and a slam of his shield. Aaron turned and called, "Next wave incoming. North side. 3 constructs, heavily armored." Kael ran up the broken tower wall and perched at the top, chest heaving. He could feel his mana dipping, but not dangerously. "Hold positions," he called down. "Save big spells. I'll stall." As the armored constructs approached, Kael raised his hands. Crimson Lance. The lance launched straight into the lead construct, cracking its armor. The shock slowed the others long enough for Lyra to raise a shield, Doran to reposition, and Aaron to pick them off one by one. The fight stretched on. 10 minutes. 15. 25. Constructs grew larger. More intelligent. Elemental affinities began to mix. Wind blades, ice fangs, earth tremors. Kael kept casting, each spell sharper than the last. His vision blurred once, but he forced his focus back. They weren't just holding. They were sinking. At 38 minutes, the overseer's voice returned. Final wave. Boss construct incoming. The trees split open. A wormshade reaper rose from the mist, serpentine body wrapped in chains, its head crowned in ice, its tail laced with flame. Kael moved forward instinctively. "I'll draw it," he said. "Keep me covered." Eren called, "Don't take it head-on. Dance around it." Kael didn't answer. He raised his hand. Ash bind. Chains of fire shot forward, catching the creature's leading coil. The WRM screeched and slammed its tail down. Kael dodged, barely avoiding a fiery shockwave that cracked the ground beside him. Doran charged the side and drew its attention with a deafening roar. Lyra cast a shield over Kael just as another strike came. He spun beneath the creature, shaped a final spell and pulled in all remaining mana. Crimson Lance. The spear of pure fire drove straight into the WRM's chest, just as Eren's arrow found its core. With a final screech, the creature shattered into fragments. The battlefield fell silent. Their badges flared gold. "Trial complete," the overseer announced. Team E27. Performance, 93% efficiency. Highest coordination score of the day. Kael dropped to one knee, sweat pouring down his face. Eren clapped him on the back. "You're getting faster." Doran handed him water. "You're also reckless, but we'll fix that later." Lyra smiled faintly. "You led without saying it." Kael stood slowly. He looked at his badge, still glowing. They had done more than survive. They had proven themselves as a team. Night fell gently over the camp of embers. The fires had died down after the elite trial, and many tents had gone quiet. Some recruits celebrated quietly with their teams, others sat alone, brooding over mistakes made or battles lost. Kael didn't join either group. He sat at the far edge of camp, just beyond the runebound perimeter, where the trees grew thick and the stars stretched clear above the canopy. The faint glow of his mana orb lit a small clearing around him, but he hadn't cast in nearly an hour. He was thinking. His gloves lay beside him, fingers charred from the last few spells during the trial. His coat still smelled faintly of scorched stone. Yet beneath the exhaustion, something else stirred. Restlessness. The fire inside him wasn't cooling like it usually did after battle. It had settled, but deep. Heavy. Like something had shifted and was waiting to rise again. He reached into his coat and pulled out the silver solstice token. It gleamed softly in the moonlight. He traced its edge with his thumb. Then from behind the trees a branch snapped. Kael turned sharply, hand half raised, mana crackling at his fingertips. "Easy," came a voice. Leon Very stepped into the clearing, his sword sheathed, hands empty. Kael lowered his flame but didn't relax fully. Didn't expect company. Leon approached and sat across from him without asking. "I saw your score from the trial," he said. "Impressive." Kael gave a small shrug. "We worked as a team." "That's what made it impressive," Leon replied. "Your magic's strong, but it wasn't just the flames that kept your team alive. It was how you used them." Kael looked at him carefully. "Is this praise, or a warning?" Leon smirked faintly. "A bit of both." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Leon's tone shifted. "You're not just an amplifier, Kael." Kael frowned. "What?" Leon looked out at the trees. "I didn't see it before. But during the duel and again in the trial. The way your spells responded to your emotions. The speed. The pull. That's not just amplified casting." Kael narrowed his eyes. "Then what is it?" Leon leaned forward slightly. "There's a class of rare awakenings, classified ones. Not listed in open guild records. Usually buried deep inside bloodlines or triggered under extreme conditions. Are you saying I have one of those?" "I'm saying," Leon replied slowly, "you might be more than even Solstice knows." Kael scoffed quietly. "I'm just a blacksmith's son. I grew up fixing kettles and counting copper. I don't have any secret bloodline." Leon's gaze didn't waver. Maybe not by blood, but by consequence. Kael looked down at his palm. The fire that once felt like a tool, now felt like a voice. One that had started whispering. Before he could speak, another figure stepped into the clearing. Lyra. Her eyes were calm but sharp. "You're not supposed to be out here alone, Kael. Instructors check boundaries after midnight." Kael stood, brushing dust from his coat. "I needed space." Leon stood as well. "We were talking." Lyra's gaze flicked to him, then back to Kael. "About what?" Kael hesitated. Then quietly, "Something's changing." She didn't press, but her silence spoke volumes. Leon offered a short nod. "Rest well. The next phase begins tomorrow. The real exam draws closer." With that, he vanished into the trees. Lyra stepped beside Kael. "You trust him?" "No," Kael said. "But I think he sees something I'm just starting to understand." They began walking back toward camp together. The stars shifted overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a faint heat stirred beneath the earth. The next morning came with an announcement that rippled through the entire camp. At the central pavilion, instructors stood before a gathered crowd of candidates. Guild banners flanked the raised platform and the lead examiner, A tall woman with gray armor and a scroll-bound spear stepped forward. By decree of Solstice Flame Academy, Phase 2 of the pre-examination will begin at dawn tomorrow. All candidates are to report to the Infernal Basin. Whispers broke out instantly. Kael leaned closer to Aaron. What's the Infernal Basin? Aaron's jaw tightened. A dormant volcanic trench. Supposedly sealed off decades ago. It was a battlefield site before the peace accords. Doran raised a brow. Why are they sending students into a war zone? Lyra's voice was quiet. Because the exam isn't just about power anymore. It's about what power does to people. The lead examiner continued. Teams will be evaluated under battlefield survival conditions. Constructs will not be limited to simulated forms. You will face natural hazards. Mana distortion zones. Enemy tactics pulled from real historical encounters. Kael felt the warmth stir behind his ribs again. A battlefield. That was what the fire had always been drawn toward. That night, Kael didn't sleep. He sat at the edge of camp again, hands resting over his knees, breathing slow and steady. His gloves lay beside him as always. He pressed his palm to the dirt. Why did you choose me? He whispered. No one answered. But the heat rose gently beneath his skin, curling through his veins like smoke. He remembered the mirrors from the trial. The vision of himself surrounded by ash. The fear of losing control. And the truth settled quietly. It had never been about choosing. It had been about answering. The fire didn't belong to him. But it had waited for him. The caravan of reinforced spellcraft wagons creaked down the rocky slope just after dawn. Dozens of students from the Camp of Embers sat in silence, weapons in hand, cloaks drawn tight against the morning chill. Ahead of them, the terrain transformed. Pine trees gave way to charred stone, jagged ridges, and broken earth that steamed faintly in the cold air. The infernal basin stretched wide across the horizon, a cratered battlefield left behind after one of the last great conflicts between humans and invading races. The land here had never fully healed. Kael sat near the front of the first wagon, his arms resting across his knees. His gloves were fastened and his spellbook was tucked securely at his waist. He wasn't nervous, not the way he used to be, but a strange quiet had settled over him since the announcement. They were no longer being tested in isolation. This was the beginning of something larger. Doran sat beside him, humming some old tavern tune under his breath. Behind them, Aaron adjusted the string of his bow, and Lyra rested her hand over her satchel, eyes closed in meditation. As the caravan came to a stop, the lead instructor, a broad-shouldered woman in burnished bronze armor, stood atop the front wagon. You've arrived, she called, her voice clear and sharp. This is not a mock dungeon or a training illusion. The infernal basin is real. Alive. It breathes with wild mana, the kind you cannot shape without care. You will be sent into the zone in active squads. Each team will be given one directive: secure and defend an ancient relic site for 12 hours. Whispers broke out. Kael stayed silent. The instructor raised a sealed scroll. Each site holds fragments from the old war, cores, weapons, sealed tomes. Your mission is to prevent simulated enemies from claiming it. You will be marked. You will be hunted. Other squads will receive opposing orders. Doran muttered, they're making us play defense and offense? Lyra opened her eyes. They're testing leadership. Kael stood slowly as his team was called. Team E27. Assignment, Ember Site Theta. They disembarked and walked across the fractured ground toward their drop point. The relic site wasn't far, a half-collapsed stone ruin partially buried in volcanic ash. Broken pillars jutted out from the ground like teeth. A cracked altar stood at the center, glowing faintly with runes that pulsed like a heartbeat. Kael placed his palm against the stone. Warm. Ancient. It's still active, he said. Something sealed inside. Lyra stepped up beside him. It's protected by old flame wards. Very old. Doran dropped his pack. Guess it's a perfect place for a flame mage. Kael didn't respond. He walked the perimeter carefully, marking choke points, collapsed walls, and overhangs that could be used for cover. Aaron followed him, occasionally pointing out angles for archers or blind spots. They worked without speaking much. There was no need. By the time the sun had risen fully, they had reinforced the central altar with light wards and cleared loose rubble from the entryways. Their first 2 hours passed quietly. Too quietly. It was during the 4th hour that the wind shifted. Kael stood near the altar when he felt it, a thin ripple through the air like mana being pulled out of rhythm. He raised his head. They're here. Aaron, perched above the eastern ledge, called down. 2 incoming. West approach. Light armor. Fast. Kael moved quickly, hands already glowing with flame. As the first enemy emerged from the shadows, a simulation construct shaped like a rogue wielding twin blades, Kael cast flame coil, binding its legs and pulling it face first into the dirt. Doran charged and slammed his shield into the second, who had tried flanking. Lyra cast a sigil above the altar, reinforcing the ward's outer shell. The fight lasted only a few moments, but Kael didn't relax. He could feel it now. The fire beneath the ground was stirring. 2 hours later, the real assault began. A full opposing team, 5 candidates marked with obsidian badges, charged from the eastern ridge. They were fast, coordinated, and brutal. The leader, a tall boy with silver runes along his sleeves, sent a blast of wind that shattered part of the outer wall. Another cast illusion cloaks over 2 flanking members, nearly bypassing Kael's defense. Doran held the front. Aaron moved between cover, picking off attackers with arrows tipped in mana. Lyra was a blur, chanting shield after shield. Kael stood in the center, fire building behind his ribs like a storm. He launched Ash Bind, catching one flanker. Then a tight Crimson Bloom that forced 3 enemies back. But the leader kept coming. He darted straight for the altar, sword raised, wind pushing him forward. Kael didn't wait. He met him head-on, sliding into a low-casting stance. Crimson Lance. The spell exploded forward. The wind user raised a shield, but the lance shattered it and sent him flying back into the rubble. The others retreated moments later. Kael fell to one knee, panting. He was running low, but they'd held. As the sun dipped lower, Kael sat beside the altar, eyes half closed. Around him, the others patched wounds, drank potions, and checked the perimeter. The relic pulsed beside him, and the fire inside him, beneath him, grew hotter. Then the ground trembled. Kael looked up sharply. Another team? Doran asked, standing quickly. Kael shook his head. No, it's not them. The altar flared. The runes pulsed once, then cracked. A pillar of flame burst upward. Kael stumbled back. From the heart of the altar rose a fragment spirit, a being of pure flame, formed from the essence of a fallen champion. Its body hovered just above the stone, head crowned in embers, voice like crackling wood. Heirs of flame, it said, echoing in all directions. One among you bears the unclaimed ember. The spark of the crimson path. Kael stood frozen. The others stared at him. Lyra whispered, "What did it say?" Kael stepped forward slowly. "What is the crimson path?" The spirit's eyes burned brighter. The power forgotten. A legacy abandoned. A trial passed through fire. You carry its echo. Then it vanished. The altar dimmed. Kael stood in silence, the warmth now searing beneath his skin. Doran let out a low breath. Okay, that was new. Aaron lowered his bow. You heard it? It was speaking to you. Lyra stepped forward. You carry something old. Something tied to flame, but not just as an element. As a will. Kael clenched his fist slowly. It's awakening. They stood together in silence as the last light of day fell across the ruined basin. Far above them, from hidden towers beyond the cliffs, the solstice examiners watched in silence. One of them turned to the other. The crimson path has found a bearer. The return journey from the infernal basin was quiet. No cheers. No stories. Just the slow clatter of wheels and the soft rustling of wind across blackened stone. The sky above was a blanket of gray, thick with mist that hung low over the charred hills. Kael sat in the back of the wagon, legs dangling off the side. His gloves were off. His hands ached, not from strain but from something else. A warmth that refused to fade. It pulsed gently beneath his skin, as if something ancient had settled inside and wasn't ready to sleep. He stared down at his palms. The spirit's voice echoed again in his mind. You carry its echo. Beside him, Aaron cleaned his bow in silence. Doran snored softly under a wool cloak, and Lyra watched Kael with unreadable eyes. You haven't said a word since the spirit, she said finally. Kael didn't answer right away. Then, what is the crimson path? Lyra exhaled. A legend. I thought it was just that. Tell me. She leaned back, arms crossed. It said that long ago, before the first flame academies were founded, there were individuals who didn't just cast fire, they spoke to it, lived with it, walked beside it. They didn't control fire. They followed it. Kael frowned. Followed it where? No one knows. Some say the path led to a place called the Ember Vault. Others say it was a state of mind. A condition where magic was no longer cast but channeled. Instinctively. As though the flame itself chose when to act. Kael looked back at his hands. They said I carry the echo. Aaron finally spoke, quiet and certain. That means your flame doesn't just amplify. It listens. Kael clenched his fists slowly, feeling the heat stir at the edge of his focus. I never wanted to be chosen by anything. Lyra replied softly, most who are chosen don't. The caravan reached camp by nightfall. Candidates disembarked and filtered toward their tents, most exhausted, some injured, others whispering rumors of what they'd seen. Rival teams falling, relics glowing, constructs moving as if possessed. But one name came up more than any other. Kael Emberhart. The boy whose relic altar spoke. Kael ignored the murmurs and went straight to the edge of the camp, finding the quiet slope near the cliffside where the stars always looked clearest. The wind carried the scent of ash and pine. He sat cross-legged and closed his eyes. The fire was louder now. Not in sound but in sensation. It responded to thought. Emotion. Breathing. He didn't summon it, it came to him. A A small flicker danced across his palms. He spoke to it. Why me? It flared, then stilled. No answer. But no rejection. Just presence. Then behind him, a new voice entered the quiet. You found it, didn't you? Leon said. Kael didn't turn. I didn't find anything. It found me. Leon stepped closer, cloak trailing over the grass. You were chosen. The others felt it too. Rain. The instructors. They'll mark you now. Watch you. Wait for you to stumble. Kael opened his eyes. I don't plan to. Leon sat beside him, legs crossed. Neither did the last one. Kael glanced at him. There was someone before? Leon nodded slowly. 12 years ago. A student awakened a flame that didn't burn like the rest. He was calm. Controlled. Too controlled. They said he could silence a battlefield with one breath. Kael waited. Leon continued. One day he vanished. The academy sealed the records. But rumor says he tried to walk the path alone. Without allies. Without restraint. What happened to him? No one knows, Leon said. Only that the Crimson Path isn't walked with fire alone. The next morning, camp disbanded. Candidates received scrolls stamped with the Academy's seal, an official invitation to the entrance trials at Solstice Flame Academy. Kael stood in line with the others, waiting as names were called. He could feel the stares again, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. But he didn't flinch. When his name was called, the instructor handed him a different scroll. Dark red seal. Silver string. She didn't explain. Just gave a short nod. Kael stepped away and opened it in private, near the eastern ridge. Inside. To Kael Emberhart, bearer of amplified flame, recognized by the Ember Echo. You are summoned to the inner gate examination. Arrival expected in 7 days. Do not delay. Special track. Personal evaluation. The path begins at solstice. Kael exhaled slowly. This was no longer just about entrance. It was a summons. That night, before leaving camp, Kael stood one last time beside the broken training pillar at the edge of the field. The same one where he'd practiced his first focus spell weeks ago. He raised one hand, flame curling gently across his fingers. Then he cast a single fire bolt, compact and silent. It struck the pillar without sound, burning a small symbol into the stone. A flame. Ringed in ash. He turned and walked back toward the trail. The wind shifted behind him. The fire didn't follow. It walked beside him. The wind shifted as the airship crested the final ridge, revealing the great cliffs of Solstice Flame Academy. Built into the jagged edge of the Ember Spine Mountains, the academy was a fortress of stone and fire suspended above the clouds. Towers spiraled high into the sky, each pulsing with elemental auras, red for fire, blue for water, green for wind, and gold for light. Floating platforms drifted between the towers, each etched with glowing runes that shimmered like starlight in the morning sun. Kael stood at the edge of the viewing deck, hands gripping the railing as the academy came into full view. His eyes widened. It was more than a school. It was a city of flame and sky. Big enough for you? Doran asked beside him, adjusting the straps of his travel pack. I feel like an ant riding a dragon. Aaron nodded slowly. They weren't exaggerating. This place is old. Very old. Lyra remained silent, her eyes tracing the layout of the towers. There's more beneath it, she murmured. I can feel the mana pull from the cliffs. Kael said nothing. But he felt it too. The flame inside him pulsed, not with danger but with recognition. As if the very stone of the academy whispered, "You've come home." The airship docked at the outer landing terrace, a platform guarded by sentries in ember-plated armor. Students disembarked in groups, stepping onto rune-marked stones that floated them gently down to the welcome atrium, a wide, circular hall of black marble and red flame glass. A towering figure awaited them near the center dais. Tall, robed in layered crimson cloth, and crowned with a circlet of embers, the headmaster radiated silent authority. His beard was short, his gaze sharp, and fire symbols danced faintly along his sleeves. I am Headmaster Valen Ashedge, he spoke, his voice calm but deep. Welcome to Solstice. No one spoke. He continued. You are the strongest class we've accepted in a decade. You've survived trials, dungeons, duels. But here, survival is not enough. His eyes swept over them. You will be tested, refined. And those who do not rise will fall. Not by blade but by the weight of their own magic. He extended his hand and flames leapt from his palm, forming into a single floating symbol. A stylized ember. Let this be your creed. Fire is not only destruction. It is judgment. And it remembers. The ember vanished. He turned and walked away. No applause followed. Only silence. Kael and his team were guided to their designated housing tower, Sable Hall, one of the mid-tier dormitories. It spiraled up the eastern cliffside, rooms arranged in open tiers around a central core. Mana lamps lit the halls and walls were reinforced with spell-treated stone. Each of them received their own room, small but private, with a bed, desk, and an arcane sigil etched into the floor for practicing. Kael stood alone in his room for a long while after the others had settled in. He dropped his pack, sat at the edge of his bed and breathed slowly. Outside his window, a floating lantern drifted past, leaving faint trails of firelight in its wake. Then a voice echoed through the room. "Students of Sable Hall, this is Instructor Talrin. First years will report to the Tower of Elemental Binding at dawn for your flame evaluation. Bring no weapons. Your magic will be tested without it." Kael stood and looked at his gloves on the table. No weapons? Then it would just be him and the flame. The next morning, the Tower of Elemental Binding loomed high above the Central Academy grounds. Forged of obsidian and silver glass, it hummed with power that vibrated faintly through the soles of Kael's boots as he and the others entered. Inside, students stood in a wide ring around a raised platform at the center of which burned a living flame. No fuel, no smoke, just raw, hovering fire that shifted with the mood of the room. Instructor Talrin, a woman with short hair and dark robes, stepped forward. Her arms bore glowing tattoos shaped like rivers of fire. "You will approach the binding flame one by one," she said. "Let it touch your core. Not your mana. Your will. It will respond and we will see how far you've truly come." Kael watched as the first student approached. A wind mage. The flame flared lightly, then dimmed. Another followed. An earth caster. The flame bent sideways, pulsed once and returned to neutral. Then it was Kael's turn. He stepped into the ring. The other students fell silent. Talrin raised a hand. "Let the flame judge." Kael approached. The flame pulsed once. Then twice. Then it roared. A pillar of crimson fire erupted upward, towering above the tower dome, shaking the walls with pressure. Students stumbled back. Even the instructors tensed. The flame wrapped around Kael without burning. Soft, warm, familiar. Then it whispered, words that only he could hear. "You have heard us. Now let us be heard." Then it vanished. Only Kael remained standing in the circle. Talrin stepped forward, her eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with interest. "Emberhart," she said, "you walked deeper than we expected." Kael said nothing. The fire had spoken. And it was remembering. The echo of the binding flame still lingered in Kael's chest long after the tower session ended. Even as the other students filed out of the obsidian ring in hushed murmurs, Kael stood by the exit, his gaze distant. No one spoke to him. Some glanced. A few whispered. But most simply kept their distance. The fire had made its choice obvious. And now everyone knew. The next morning, Kael returned to the Tower of Elemental Binding, alone this time. Instructor Talrin had summoned him personally with a short note that read, "Your connection to the binding flame has opened a deeper test. Report at dawn. Come unarmed." He arrived just as the first rays of morning stretched across the sky, casting long amber light through the tower's high windows. The flames at the center of the chamber were smaller now, calm like sleeping embers. Talrin stood beside them, arms folded, her black robes edged in deep crimson. "You came," she said without looking at him. "I don't exactly have a choice," Kael replied, stepping forward. She turned to face him, her eyes sharp. "No one is forcing you. If you wish to turn back you can." Kael hesitated. "But only for a moment." "I'm staying." Talrin gave a faint nod. "Good." She stepped aside and gestured to the flame, which now hovered at chest height, pulsing gently. "This is the flame crucible," she said. "A relic from the old world. Long before the academies, before our systems, before order. It predates the profession system. It doesn't test your control. It doesn't care about rank." Kael looked at it. "Then what does it test?" "Who you are," she said simply. "And what your flame is willing to burn for." The crucible shimmered. Heat rolled off it, not painfully but deeply, like the kind of warmth that reached past skin into memory. "Step forward," Talrin said. "Let the crucible see you." Kael took a breath and obeyed. The moment his foot crossed the inner ring, the crucible flared. And the world shifted. He stood in darkness. No tower. No instructor. No floor beneath his feet, only flame spreading infinitely like ripples in a black ocean. Yet the fire didn't burn. It waited. A voice stirred, not from outside but within. "Who are you?" Kael opened his mouth to answer. "I'm." But the word caught. Because for a moment he wasn't sure. He'd always been Kael Emberhart. The blacksmith's son. The student who stumbled into a fire that was too big for him. The mage who couldn't cast a small spell without nearly collapsing. But now the flame listened. Now it watched. He spoke again. "I don't know what I am. But I know what I want." The flame pulsed. "Then show us." Scenes unfolded around him like glass breaking in slow motion. The first was his childhood. A forge. His father laughing, soot on his face. His mother humming softly, stitching a torn satchel by lantern light. Kael as a boy, staring into the furnace. Even then, the fire had fascinated him. Not because it was powerful, but because it moved. Then the glass shattered and the next vision came. His awakening. The flames erupting in the chamber, uncontrollable. The fear. The awe. The silence afterward. Power without control becomes destruction, the voice said. Kael nodded slowly. I learned that. And I nearly paid for it. More images. The early dungeons. His failures. His near burnout. The coil that wrapped too wide and nearly hit Eren. Then the arena. His duel with Leon. The fire blooming like instinct. And the basin. The spirit rising. The echo speaking. Kael stood amidst the swirling memories, heart steady. I'm not the strongest, he said aloud. But I listen. And I learn. The flame stilled. Then it rushed into him. A surge, not pain, not heat, but remembrance. Not of battles, but of feelings. Every time he'd hesitated. Every time he'd fought to hold the flame back. And every time he'd let it burn for someone else's sake. He fell to his knees, hands trembling. The crucible whispered one last time. You are not fire's master. You are its voice. Kael opened his eyes. He was back in the tower. Still kneeling, sweat pouring down his brow. The crucible floated calmly before him, now a deep amber hue. Tauren stood nearby, arms folded, watching him closely. Well? She asked. Kael slowly rose. I saw everything. Then you passed. Kael raised an eyebrow. What if I had failed? The crucible would have shown you something else, she replied. Something you weren't ready to see. She walked to the side of the chamber and retrieved a small sealed scroll. This is a permit, she said. For the inner flame archives. They're restricted to candidates who've completed the crucible. Only 5 students this year have been granted access. Kael took the scroll, feeling the heat of its seal. What's in there? Tauren smiled faintly. Records, stories, and something very old that may understand you better than we can. Later that afternoon, Kael stood in the hallway just outside the archives. The door was made of dark stone, runes etched deep into its surface. 2 flame-forged lanterns burned silently on either side, casting shifting shadows across the floor. He held the scroll in one hand, then knocked once. The door opened on its own. Inside, the chamber was dim. Rows of ancient books lined the curved walls, and glowing embers floated above the shelves like lazy fireflies. Kael stepped in. No one greeted him. But he heard something. Not a voice. A rhythm. The same one he'd heard in the crucible. The fire wasn't just a weapon. It was a memory. And it was waiting to be remembered. 2 days after Kael walked through the doors of the inner flame archives, the tone of the academy shifted. Gone were the quiet days of settling in, and gone too was the air of silent awe. Now eyes narrowed in calculation. Cloaks moved faster. Spells ignited in training courtyards without warning. Because the rankings had begun. Solstice Flame Academy didn't just measure students through exams and grades. It used the ladder, a real-time ranking system updated daily, posted on enchanted crystal boards throughout the towers. Advancement meant prestige, access to better training chambers, higher-tier scrolls, and priority instruction. Falling meant being forgotten. And on the first day the board glowed with names. Kael stood in front of the largest crystal outside Sable Hall with Eren, Lyra, and Doran. Students crowded the courtyard behind them, whispering, pointing, and jostling for a closer look. Rank 1, Rain Valkyrin, Eren read aloud. Combat score, 96.2. Tactical cohesion, 91.5. Efficiency, 94.8. No surprise there, Lyra said softly. He's a prodigy. Sword Spirit, Tier 4 training, pre-academy placement. Doran elbowed Kael. Look who's in the top 10. Kael looked. His name glowed faintly beside rank 7. Kael Emberhart, combat score, 90.1. Efficiency, 88.3. Arcane sync, 93.5. Kael blinked. Arcane sync. Lyra explained, it's a hidden metric tied to how well a mage channels their element's will. It measures alignment, not just output. Eren gave a nod. You're syncing with your flame. That crucible trial pushed you up the ladder. Kael stared at his name, then looked lower on the list. Leon sat at rank 12. Juna Fellshade, his previous opponent from Camp of Embers, was at rank 19. But it was the rank beneath his own that gave him pause. Rank 8, Saran of the Obsidian Guild. Kael didn't know the name. But something about it made the fire in his chest flicker uneasily. Later that day, in the training rings outside the Arcane Spire, the duels began. Not all ranking shifts came from trials or dungeon scores. Students could challenge others directly. Official duels. Public, sanctioned, and recorded. Kael watched from the upper balcony as 2 mages, one wind, one lightning, collided in a blast of competing elements. The match ended quickly. The lightning mage overextended. The wind caster redirected her own attack. The crowd applauded politely, but Kael could feel the tension. These weren't duels for pride. They were challenges born of necessity. Someone's going to come for you, Eren said beside him. Kael didn't look away from the ring. Let them. But it wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. That evening the summons came. A folded letter on Kael's desk when he returned from training. The envelope bore no seal, just his name, written in sharp black ink. He opened it. To Kael Emberhart, ranked 7th. You are hereby challenged to an official ladder match by Saran of the Obsidian Guild. Time, tomorrow, second sun bell. Arena, Ring of Cinders. Approval granted. Match confirmed. He stared at the name. Still unfamiliar. Then he folded the letter and tucked it into his coat. The next morning, the Ring of Cinders was packed. Unlike the Silverleaf Arena, the Cinders Ring was smaller, hotter, with floating glyphs etched across the stone floor. The stands wrapped tightly around it, and instructors watched from elevated perches. Kael entered the ring first, his boots tapping lightly on the enchanted floor. His gloves were laced. His breath calm. Then Saran arrived. A tall girl, perhaps a year older, with coal-black hair braided behind her shoulder. Her robes were cut short for movement, and across her back were 5 small obsidian orbs bound in metal chains. When she stepped into the ring, the air changed. Heavy. Cold. Smoldering. Kael Emberhart, she said, voice cool. I've watched your trials. Kael nodded. And I've never heard of you. She smiled faintly. That's how I like it. The overseer raised a hand. This is an official ladder match. First to yield or incapacitation. No lethal force. The air held still. Then the signal rang. Kael moved first, casting flame coil low to probe her defense. Saran flicked her wrist. One of the obsidian orbs unlatched and spun into the air, generating a pulse that disrupted Kael's flame before it reached her. Mana disruption. Time to frequency. He cast Ash Bind, this time shaping it wide. It snaked across the floor, fast and layered. Saran responded by launching 2 more orbs. They struck the ash ring, grounded the flame, and diffused the spell. Kael narrowed his eyes. She wasn't casting. She was countering. Her orbs moved on instinct, bound to precast sequences. Then Saran finally acted. She pointed forward, and a shockwave burst from her lead orb, slamming into Kael's left side. He rolled, skidded, and caught himself mid-cast. Crimson Lance. The spear of fire launched fast, sharp, direct. Saran blocked with a black barrier formed by linking 3 orbs. The lance cracked it but didn't break through. She stepped forward, cool and composed. You cast with emotion, she said. I cast with patterns. Kael's eyes narrowed. Then he smiled. Then I guess it's time to change the rhythm. He dropped low and began shaping Flame Arc, not as an attack, but as a shell. The flame curved around him, hiding his movement. He leapt to the side and launched a crimson bloom wide, forcing her orbs to spread defensively. Then he struck, fast and close. Fire bolt. Ash bind. Lance. One after the other. She blocked the bolt, dodged the bind. But the lance, it came low from an unexpected angle. The edge clipped her shoulder, burning her robe and knocking her back. Her orbs staggered in response. The overseer raised a hand. Match pause. Injury registered. One more impact will trigger match end. Kael stood still, breathing shallow. Saran looked up at him. Then smiled. Clever. She raised a hand. I yield. The match ended. Kael stepped off the platform to quiet applause. He didn't seek the praise. He didn't need it. But when he turned to look one last time, Saran was still watching him. Not with anger. With interest. Like someone marking a future ally, or a future threat. That night, the crystal board updated again. Kael Emberhart, rank 5. Above him, the names glowed. Rain. Leon. An elf named Talon. A dragonkin named Varric. Below him, new rivals rose quickly. And somewhere behind all of it, the fire kept whispering. Not of fame. Not of power. But of pressure. And what happens when the flame is finally cornered? Rain fell softly over Solstice Academy that night. The sound of it pattered against the dorm towers and shimmered along the mana barriers that protected the skybridges. The flames in the lanterns burned lower, flickering with the weight of the approaching storm. Kael stood alone in the outer courtyard of Sable Hall, his training gloves soaked and dark with water. He had been casting in the rain, not for training, not for power, but to feel it. Even here, in the cold and damp, the fire within him still answered. Weaker. Slower. But alive. He stretched his fingers, letting sparks trail through the mist. So this is what resistance feels like, he thought. And still the fire endures. Then he heard footsteps. He turned slowly. A figure emerged from the shadows of the colonnade, a student, tall, with a hood drawn low. Around his wrist was a silver badge. Kael recognized the design immediately. Midnight Challenge. Solstice Academy had many formal systems. The ladder, the trials, the duels. But there was one ritual few spoke of aloud, and none advertised openly, the Midnight Challenge. It wasn't recorded on the ranking board. There were no overseers, no instructors watching from above. It existed in the cracks between the rules, where ambition thrived and grudges grew. A sanctioned fight, but only by tradition. Kael narrowed his eyes. You're challenging me here? Now. The figure lowered his hood. It was a boy Kael vaguely recognized from ranking matches. Thin, fast, lightning-aligned. Narek Haldren, rank 14. Known for never losing to mages who stood still. "I heard you're unbeatable," Narek said calmly. "I don't believe it." Kael's expression didn't shift. "This isn't how rankings work. This isn't about the rankings." He stepped forward, water dripping from the tips of his hair. "This is about reminding everyone that flame can be put out." Kael said nothing. Then he turned fully and walked to the center of the open court. "Fine. But you'd better hit first." The moment Narek struck, Kael moved. The lightning came fast in arcs that curved unnaturally with the air. It wasn't a single strike, it was a chain meant to trap Kael's steps and compress his movement. Kael rolled under the first bolt, cast ash bind across the stone floor, and sent a short fire bolt at Narek's right side. The bolt missed, but Narek had to pivot, breaking his pattern. Kael pressed. He summoned Flame Coil, spinning it tight like a whip, and lashed it forward. But Narek flicked his fingers. A lightning shield burst from his palm and turned the coil into steam. Kael stepped back, rain soaking his cloak. "He's fast." He cast without speaking. "He's been training with silence techniques." Narek grinned. "What's wrong? Fire doesn't like water?" Kael said nothing. He raised one hand, palm open. The flame came slower, but it came. He didn't aim directly. Instead, he struck the floor behind Narek. Crimson bloom. The blast hit the stone, sending up a wall of heat and steam that swallowed Narek's vision. Kael was already moving through the mist. He ducked left, circled wide, and launched ash bind low and quiet, aiming for Narek's ankle. It landed. The lightning mage stumbled. Kael cast again. Crimson lance. The flame surged forward, not at full power but fast enough to knock Narek off his feet. The boy hit the wet stone with a grunt, sliding backward. Kael walked forward, the fire still alive in his hands. Narek tried to rise, but Kael stopped just short of him. He let the flame drift away. "Your reminder didn't land," Kael said. "Next time, come with more than bravado." Narek looked up, chest heaving. He opened his mouth, then froze. Kael had drawn a symbol in the rain beneath them. A flame. Close. Held. The symbol of containment. Control. He had never let the fire go wild. Even now, it waited for his word. Narek stood slowly and bowed his head once. Then walked away without another word. The next morning, Kael returned to his dorm late, clothes still damp, gloves wrung out. Aaron sat at his desk, working through a spell diagram. "You were out late," Aaron said without looking up. Kael unstrapped his boots. "Midnight challenge." Aaron paused. "Who?" "Narek. Rank 14. Did you lose?" Kael pulled off his soaked coat and draped it over the wall hook. "He did." Aaron finally looked up. "They're watching you, Kael. Not just the instructors. The students. Everyone who's trying to climb. You're fire, and that means you're the target." Kael nodded. "Let them come." Aaron stood and walked to the window. "It's not about whether they come. It's whether you burn everything down just to stop them." Kael looked at him. Then said quietly, "I won't." Aaron didn't reply. But Kael meant it. The crucible had shown him enough to know. He wasn't meant to be fire's master. He was meant to be its balance. Later that day, the rankings board updated quietly. Kael remained at rank 5. But something else had changed. Beneath the latter list, a new row of names appeared. Whispers of Flame, inner candidates chosen for path evaluation. Kael Emberhart. Rain Valkyrin. Saran of Obsidian. Talon Varelin. Averic of the Skyburn Scale. Kael stared at it. Path evaluation? Lyra stepped beside him, reading the same list. "It's connected to the Crimson Path. You've been marked." Kael turned slowly. "I didn't apply." "You didn't need to," she said. "You were already walking it." From behind them, a pair of students whispered. 5 candidates for a path that leads nowhere. Or maybe, somewhere no one's come back from. Kael turned away from the board. The fire inside him was quiet now. But not calm. It was waiting. For the path to open. The early morning sun bled gold across the rooftops of Solstice Academy, casting long shadows between the towers. Kael walked alone toward the flame-tempering chamber, a restricted facility nestled beneath the Emberglass Library. His boots echoed softly across the stone path, each step deliberate, each breath steady. He had received the summons the night before. No explanation, no sender, just a short note tucked under his door. "The fire within you has begun to rise. Before it consumes, it must be bound." Tempering chamber. Dawn. Kael didn't ask questions. He simply went. The flame-tempering chamber was quiet when he arrived, carved directly into the cliffside with walls of volcanic obsidian and a domed ceiling open to the sky. The center of the room held a circular platform engraved with deep, glowing runes. Faint trails of heat shimmered in the air above it. Instructor Taurin stood beside the platform, arms folded, her gaze sharp as ever. With her stood another figure Kael hadn't met, a short, broad-shouldered man with fire-scarred arms and half his face hidden beneath an iron mask. This is Master Reese Iron Vein, Tauren said. He oversees fire refinement and advanced elemental training. Kael gave a short nod. You called me here. Reese tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowed behind the mask. The flame inside you is no longer obeying thresholds. It doesn't pulse with instruction, it pulses with will. Kael said nothing. Reese stepped forward and jabbed a thick finger into Kael's chest, just over his heart. That means one wrong thought, one burst of fear, and you burn a hole in this mountain. Kael's jaw tightened. Then I need to learn how not to. Tauren motioned toward the rune platform. That's why you're here. Kael stood at the center of the ring. The stone beneath his feet glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with his breath. Reese paced around the platform's edge, his boots scraping against the floor. The flame isn't meant to be crushed. Every idiot who tries to lock it down ends up exploding. Literally. Kael frowned. So what am I supposed to do? Reese pointed to his own chest. You bind it, not with force but with form. Kael blinked. Form? Every true fire mage reaches a point where control no longer comes from shaping spells by memory. It comes from binding the flame to an identity. Tauren added, it's called a core flame form. Your flame becomes more than an element. It becomes a reflection. Kael stood still, the idea settling deep in his chest. Reese continued. You've already walked the crucible. That means the flame has begun choosing its shape. All you need now is the moment to let it surface. Kael lowered his gaze, closing his eyes. And how do I do that? Reese grinned. Simple. He stomped once on the edge of the ring. The runes flared. And the platform ignited. Kael was thrown backward, not by fire but by force. Mana rushed around him in spirals, lifting him into a vortex of heat and light. The world outside vanished. No walls. No sky. Just flame. Endless, seething, conscious. And then, it spoke. Not with words. With images. His mother, sitting by the hearth, flame dancing in the lantern glass. His father, hammering metal in a forge so bright it lit the whole street. His first spark, the day he accidentally set his own satchel ablaze. The dungeon. The arena. The basin. The crucible. The countless moments where the flame had answered him, not as a weapon, but as a companion. Then the vision sharpened. Kael stood, not in the chamber but atop a vast sea of fire. And ahead of him, walking through the blaze, was himself, but older. Clad in layered crimson, a flame-patterned cloak rising like wings behind him. His expression was calm. His eyes burned not with rage but with purpose. The flame-wrapped figure raised one hand. Kael's mirror did the same. And the fire spiraled inward. Not out. Not wild. But focused. Channeled. Into a shape. Kael's eyes snapped open. He stood in the ring again, panting. But something had changed. Around his hands the fire still danced. But it didn't flicker. It rotated, slowly in perfect form, around his wrists like twin flame bands. Tauren stepped forward, eyes wide. You've done it? Reese gave a low whistle. Didn't expect it this early. Most students take weeks. Kael looked down at the flames. They spun silently, controlled and sharp. This is my form? Tauren nodded. Flame bind configuration. A rare type. Most get rings, threads or embers. Yours, it wants to be worn. Reese smirked. You just gave your fire a name. Now it'll start listening. Kael clenched his fist gently, feeling the fire settle against his skin like armor. It didn't burn. It waited. That afternoon Kael returned to the training fields. Word had spread quickly. Students parted as he walked through the courtyard, many whispering about what had happened in the tempering chamber. But Kael didn't hear them. He wasn't here to impress. He was here to test what had changed. At the far end of the field, a group of students were sparring under instructor supervision. Kael stepped toward the ring and raised a hand. I want a match. One of the instructors raised an eyebrow. Voluntary challenge? Kael nodded. Yes, I'll take any three. The students nearby exchanged glances. One by one, three stepped forward. One spear wielder, one wind caster, one shield mage. They formed a triangle formation. Kael removed his gloves slowly. Begin, the instructor said. The wind caster moved first, sending a slicing current toward Kael's side. Kael didn't move. Instead, he raised his hand and twisted the fire around his wrist. Flame loop. The fire unspooled from his bind form, catching the wind and compressing it, twisting it into a spiral that redirected the attack into the sky. The students gasped. The spear wielder charged. Kael sidestepped and released a second loop, this one tighter. Chain lash. It struck the spear mid-thrust, throwing it off target. Then the shield mage came in, trying to bash him from the side. Kael moved low, spun once and summoned Crimson Bloom, but bounded inward, letting the flame burst beneath the shield. The blast lifted the student off their feet. When the dust cleared, Kael stood alone in the center. The flame rebounded around his wrists, calm and steady. The instructor stared, then smiled faintly. Controlled. Refined. You've crossed the threshold. Kael looked at his hands. He hadn't needed to shout. Hadn't needed to force it. The fire knew what he wanted. And this time, it answered perfectly. Midnight crept quietly across Solstice Academy. Rain tapped lightly on the roof of Sable Hall, and the flame lanterns in the halls flickered to half-light. Most students slept. Kael, however, was wide awake. He sat at his desk, spellbook open, though he hadn't turned a page in over an hour. The firebind rings around his wrists spun gently, dim and calm. Ever since he'd formed his core flame form, something had felt different. Not louder. Not wilder. Just deeper. As if the flame was listening more closely now, and hearing something else. There had been whispers beneath the training field today. Not voices. Not words. Just distant pulses of mana. A rhythm. Repeating. Calling. And now it was stronger. Beneath the dorm. Kael stood and slid on his coat, careful not to disturb the others in their rooms. He wasn't going far. Just down. The lower levels of Sable Hall weren't open to students at night. A ward stone blocked the spiral stairwell beyond the common hall, casting a gentle red shimmer over the passage. Kael approached slowly. His flame bind shifted with a flick of his fingers. He summoned a heat thread, precise and narrow, and traced it across the base of the ward. Click. The shimmer dissolved. Kael stepped through. The stone stairway curved tightly downward, damp and cold. Mana-infused lanterns were dark here, and used. The only light came from the small fire Kael summoned in his palm. Each step echoed. The further he went, the more his chest tightened, not from fear but from pressure. The same pressure he'd felt during the crucible, and again in the basin. But this time it wasn't memory. It was something present. At the bottom of the stair, Kael reached an old hallway carved directly into the mountain. Dust covered the floor. Faded banners hung in tatters from hooks, old symbols predating Solstice's current crest. He moved slowly, fire held low. Then he stopped. A door stood at the end of the hall. Ironbound. Shut with no handle. But his flame pulsed. There. He approached and placed his hand against it. The flame around his wrist flared once and the door groaned open, not by force but by recognition. Kael stepped inside. The room beyond was circular. Dark stone walls curved upward into a vaulted ceiling, and at the center stood a sealed archway rimmed with silver glyphs, some cracked, some still glowing faintly. In front of the arch, embedded into the floor, was a circular sigil. Kael stepped into the circle. The flame around his wrist snapped bright. And the chamber came alive. Glyphs lit across the floor. The air thickened. A whisper swept through the room, not from his mind but from the walls. A voice. Oh, hollow. Ancient. The bearer of the bind flame walks again. Kael's breath caught. He turned slowly but there was no one behind him. The archway pulsed. The gate remained sealed, but not for long. Flame remembers its source. Kael stepped forward. Who are you? No answer came. Only more pulses, like distant footsteps beneath the earth. Beneath the academy lies the first fracture. The Ember Fault. The seal cracks each time the bind flame awakens. Kael stared at the arch. A seal? A gate? Is that what's calling me? He asked aloud. Again no answer. But the flame on his wrist trembled. Yes. Then the glyphs dimmed and the light receded. Kael stood in silence. Something was below Solstice. Something ancient locked away. And his magic, his very presence, was stirring it. He turned and left the chamber, the iron door sealing silently behind him. The next morning, Kael sat across from Lyra in the Sable Hall mess lounge, poking at a bowl of stew he hadn't touched. You didn't sleep, she said, not as a question. Kael didn't deny it. I found something last night. Under the dorm. Past a sealed stairwell. Lyra frowned. You went below the wards? There's a chamber down there. An old one. With an arch. I think it's part of something sealed. She leaned in. You didn't try to open it, right? No, Kael said. It responded to me on its own. Lyra went quiet. Then whispered, the Ember Fault. Kael looked up sharply. You've heard of it? Barely. It's a myth told among archivists. The story says the original solstice was built over a natural tear in the elemental crust. A place where magic once spilled wild, unformed. The founders sealed it off with flame and oath. Kael's pulse quickened. And now it's waking up. She nodded once. And it's answering you. Later that afternoon, Kael returned to his dorm to find a letter waiting on his desk. It bore the crimson seal of Solstice's head division. He opened it. To Kael Emberhart. You are hereby invited to a preliminary audience with Headmaster Valen regarding your core flame form and its interaction with the Foundation glyphs. Time, 1 hour past dusk. Location, the Emberwatch Hall. Come alone. This matter is not for public knowledge. Kael stared at the note. The Academy knew. And they were watching. As dusk fell over Solstice, Kael walked toward Emberwatch Hall, the central tower connected to the oldest portion of the Academy. The air was cold. The flame around his wrists was still. Waiting. He reached the upper floor where the headmaster's chambers stood. The door opened before he knocked. Inside, Valen stood at a tall window overlooking the cliffs, hands clasped behind his back. "You found it," he said without turning. "The gate beneath the dorm." Kael stepped inside. "You knew it was there." "I know everything that sleeps in this place," Valen said. "But not everything that wakes." He turned, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Your flame is stirring the fault line. The Ember Fault is not just a place. It's a memory sealed in stone. And memories, when stirred, become voices." Kael's fist clenched faintly. "Why was it sealed?" "Because it was too close to the origin," Valen replied. "The first flame. The pure magic. The world before order." He stepped closer. "You are not its first echo, Kael. But you are the first in generations who has heard it clearly." Kael looked up. "What happens now?" Valen held up a sealed scroll, its wax shimmering gold. "You are granted access to the first descent." Kael's heart pounded. "Into the fault?" "Only to its edge," Valen said. "Any further and even your fire may not protect you." He placed the scroll in Kael's hand. "But if you wish to understand what you are, that path begins below." The elevator descended slowly. Kael stood alone in the arcane lift chamber, its walls humming with protective runes as it dropped deep beneath Solstice Academy. The scroll granting him access to the first descent was clutched tightly in his hand. The heat of the flame bind around his wrists pulsed in time with the glyphs above the archway. He wasn't nervous, but something about the stillness down here unsettled him. Not fear, exactly. More like being watched by the mountain itself. After nearly a full minute, the platform slowed to a stop with a soft chime. The door opened. Kael stepped out into darkness. The chamber beyond was vast, larger than he expected. The stone was smooth, untouched by students, undisturbed by time. Soft lights pulsed in the walls like embedded fireflies, their orange glow casting shifting shadows across ancient murals. Kael walked slowly, letting the silence settle. As he moved, his fire spun quietly around his wrists, casting more light. Then something stirred. Not physically. Within. A pressure, not painful but deep, pressed down into his lungs. His steps slowed. The air felt heavier. His fire responded instinctively, flickering brighter, not in defense, but in recognition. Something was here. "Welcome," came a voice. Kael stopped. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even close. Yet it echoed in the space like it had always been here. He turned toward the far wall. A figure stood at its base, cloaked in faded crimson, face obscured by a hood of shadow. No magic radiated from them. No sound accompanied their movement. They had simply appeared. Kael narrowed his eyes. "You're not an instructor." "No," the figure said. "Nor a ghost." "Not quite." "Then what are you?" The figure tilted its head. "A memory. Left behind by flame." Kael didn't step back, but the flame around his arms coiled slightly, reacting to something unseen. The figure slowly extended a hand, revealing blackened fingers traced with glowing lines of emberlight. "You bear the bind flame. That means you've heard it whisper." Kael nodded cautiously. "I heard it in the crucible. I've been hearing it since. I didn't ask for it." "Few do," the figure replied. "But once heard, the whisper never fades." They stepped to the side, revealing an engraving on the wall Kael hadn't seen before. A sigil of a spiral flame, not the solstice crest but something older. Worn, cracked, but still glowing faintly. "This is the mark of the first firebearers," the figure said. "Before there were guilds. Before the ladder. There were only those who listened. Who walked with the flame, not ahead of it, not behind it, but beside it." Kael's chest tightened. The word sounded familiar. Like something he had once thought but never spoken. The figure turned fully toward him. "You walk closer to it than any in this age." Kael swallowed. "What happens if I keep walking?" The figure was silent for a long time. Then quietly, "You burn away everything that is not true." They stepped aside again, revealing a sealed stone altar embedded in the chamber floor. Runes encircled it, old and broken, but Kael recognized the shape, a containment seal. The same kind he had seen in the Ember Fault gate. The figure gestured to it. This was once the entrance to the true path. But it was sealed after the first collapse. Collapse. When one tried to harness the flame without accepting its burden. Power was taken, not given. And the path shattered. Kael stepped forward. The altar pulsed faintly beneath his feet. Not calling. Just watching. The figure's voice lowered. "If you descend further, you must be willing to lose." Kael turned. "Lose what?" "Control. Comfort. Everything that isn't you." The chamber dimmed. The flame on Kael's arms trembled, but not from instability. It was waiting for his answer. He breathed slowly. And stepped away from the altar. "Not yet," he said. The figure nodded once. "Wise." Kael looked at them. "Will I see you again?" "Perhaps," the figure said. "If your fire remembers me." Then they were gone. No flame. No sound. Just the echo of their presence, fading into the chamber like ash caught in wind. Kael returned to the lift platform. It rose slowly, carrying him away from the silence below. His reflection shimmered in the lift's rune glass. His eyes looked clearer. The fire quieter. But in his chest, something had deepened. He now knew what lay beneath the academy wasn't a monster. It was a choice. And one day he would have to make it. Back in his room, Kael found Lyra waiting. She sat at the edge of his desk, arms crossed. "You were gone all day," she said. "Again." Kael set his coat aside. "I was summoned to the Emberwatch descent." She nodded. "And?" Kael hesitated. Then slowly said, "There's something down there. Not just a seal. A memory. A guide. Something old enough to speak through fire." Lyra didn't look shocked. Instead she stood. "There's more." "I know." Kael looked at her. "You've been studying it too." She nodded. "I've been reading through old records. Pre-collapse texts. Whispered accounts of the Ember Vault. There's a pattern in every tale of the Bind Flame, visions, voices, and a choice." She stepped closer. "And all of them end the same way. The bearer descends. But not all return." Kael didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of what I'll find." Lyra looked into his eyes. "But are you ready for what you'll leave behind?" Outside, thunder rolled gently across the mountain. The flame around Kael's arms pulsed once, then settled. It didn't urge him forward. It didn't pull him back. It simply waited. Because the next step wasn't about strength. It was about truth. The storm had not passed. By midday, the rain still fell in steady sheets across Solstice Academy, soaking the stone paths, darkening the towers, and turning the training fields into shallow pools. Most students stayed indoors, watching from windows or crowding beneath overhangs, their lessons postponed. But one section of the academy remained active. The cinder ring, protected by no roof or barrier, was soaked, its floor slick and glistening. A perfect circle of worn stone opened to the sky. Kael stood at its center, cloak already heavy with rain, his breath calm, the fire around his wrists swirling in slow, steady rings. Across from him stood Rain Valkyrin, the top-ranked candidate. His blade rested sheathed at his hip, and his uniform, black and silver, marked with the sigil of the Eastern Empire, clung to his frame, untouched by the downpour. His sword spirit shimmered faintly at his back, like a second shadow. No words were spoken yet. The duel hadn't begun. But the entire academy was watching. Students lined the upper balconies, some holding umbrellas, others drenched but too entranced to move. Instructors stood quietly in observation towers. Even a few guild representatives had appeared, cloaked in neutral colors, eyes sharp. Because this wasn't just a challenge. It was a clash between fire and discipline. Between the rising unknown and the one already chosen. Rain stepped forward first. "You knew this was coming," he said, his voice clear even through the storm. Kael nodded. "Eventually." "You've risen fast," Rain continued. "Too fast. The flame answers you, yes, but you don't yet understand the weight of its shape." Kael's flamebind pulsed once. "And you think you do?" "I've trained for years," Rain said. "My path was carved with blood, study, and precision. Not sudden whispers and visions." Kael tilted his head. "Are you challenging me or the fire that speaks through me?" Rain unsheathed his blade. The sword spirit awoke fully, its outline now visible as a glowing figure behind him, ethereal and quiet, with a long, curved blade and eyes like flowing water. "I'm challenging both." The signal was given. The duel began. Rain moved first, unsurprisingly fast, closing the distance in a flash of motion. His blade slashed outward with surgical precision, and Kael barely ducked in time, rolling sideways across the soaked stone. The rain made movement slippery. But Kael had trained in worse. He rebounded off the ground and summoned Flame Coil, directing it low across the floor like a lashing tail. Rain spun, deflecting it with his sword, the spirit behind him mimicking the motion, sending out a gust of wind that dissipated the tail entirely. Kael didn't pause. He stepped in and cast Ash Bind, shaping it thin and circular, trying to trap Rain's footing. But the spirit reacted first. A shimmering barrier of mist formed under Rain's feet, nullifying the ash as soon as it touched the surface. Kael exhaled sharply. He's not fighting alone. The spirit reads me just as fast as he does. Rain launched into a counterattack, slashing downward in a crescent that sent a shockwave of pressure across the ring. Kael raised his left arm, tightening the flame bind into a shield weave. The pressure hit, but the barrier held, just barely, skidding him backward across the wet ground. Rain's eyes narrowed. "Impressive. Your fire bends." Kael smirked. "Yours doesn't move unless you tell it to." He dropped low. Crimson bloom. The explosion rocked the left side of the ring, sending a spray of water and steam upward, obscuring visibility. Kael moved through the mist, circling right. He didn't go for raw force. He shaped his flame tighter, short, snapping bursts, whip forms that struck toward Rain's flank and feet. Two struck true. One wrapped Rain's shoulder, forcing him to slide back. But his sword spirit reacted instantly, slicing the flame away before Kael could chain the next strike. Then Rain shifted. His eyes changed. Calm vanished. Now he was focused. Dangerous. The spirit raised its sword and the rain slowed in the air around it, as if time itself paused for just a breath. Kael's instinct screamed. He dodged left but not fast enough. A sliver of wind slice caught his arm, burning cold despite the heat of his flame. Kael stumbled. Rain stepped in. Let me show you the difference between gifted flame and earned precision. He raised his blade for a finishing strike. And Kael grinned. Go ahead, he said. Rain froze for a moment. Then Kael whispered, Flame Echo. The ground beneath Rain's feet lit up. A delayed cast. Ash bind, hidden within the mist, charged during the last exchange. He never released it. Until now. It snapped upward. Bound Rain's foot. Held him still. Kael raised both arms. The flame bind snapped wide, spinning into twin chains. Crimson twin lance. Two spears formed, spiraled, burned bright against the storm. He launched both, one high, one low. The top forced Rain to block. The second struck him across the legs and sent him crashing backward into the ring wall. Silence followed. Steam hissed across the arena. The head instructor raised a hand. Match end. Victor, Kael Emberhart. Rain continued to fall. Kael stood in the center of the ring, chest rising and falling with each breath. The flame at his wrists dimmed again, curling gently into its usual form. He wasn't smiling. And he wasn't celebrating. He was remembering. The feeling in that last cast. Not rage. Not even pride. But a perfect, steady rhythm. His fire had listened. And together they had outmaneuvered even a spirit-bound blade. Rain stood slowly, brushing water from his sleeve. His sword spirit faded. He looked at Kael. Then bowed. Your flame has a mind of its own, he said. And so do you. Kael bowed back. It's learning to trust me. Rain turned and walked off the field without another word. The crowd was silent for another heartbeat. Then erupted into murmurs. Kael had not just held his rank. He had defeated the top of the ladder. And the fire that had once been feared was now being understood. That night, back in his room, Kael sat by the window watching the rain fall against the glass. He didn't feel triumphant. Only clearer. The voices beneath the academy had quieted. But not because they were gone. Because they were waiting. Now, the world above was no longer enough. And soon the descent would come. Not as an invitation, but as a calling. The flame beneath Kael's skin pulsed differently now. It no longer simply responded to thought. It anticipated it. Each spell came faster, more refined, as if the fire had begun casting with him rather than for him. But with the victory over Rain came something heavier, a silence. Not relief. Not peace. It was the stillness that comes before something breaks. 3 days later the summons arrived. A sealed envelope, slipped under his door at dawn. Black wax, engraved not with the solstice crest, but with a broken flame enclosed by a ring of thorns. Kael broke the seal. Inside a simple line. The ember fault stirs. The next threshold awaits. Come. Alone. No name. No signature. Just a folded corner marked in ember dust. Kael didn't tell Aaron or Lyra. Not because he wanted secrecy, but because he knew deep down this wasn't a path anyone else could walk for him. This was between him and the flame. He descended the same sealed stair beneath Sable Hall, reactivating the glyphs from memory. This time, the ward shimmered less in resistance, and more like it had been waiting. The lower corridor pulsed faintly with emberlight as Kael moved toward the sealed archway. But something had changed. The stone ring that had once pulsed quietly now cracked along its edge. Tiny fractures ran outward from the sigils, bleeding dull crimson light like veins under pressure. Kael stepped onto the central platform. A whisper followed him. You returned. The voice was different now. Clear. Closer. And when Kael looked to the side, the figure in crimson stood once more. No longer a shadow. Now solid. Their face partly visible, young but worn. Their eyes glowed faint orange like dying coals. Kael faced them directly. You sent the summons. The figure nodded. The vault opens. Your flame has unlocked the second key. The seal no longer holds. Kael looked at the gate. What's inside? The figure's voice grew quiet. What was buried? Kael took a step closer. Then show me. The gate groaned. The sigils cracked fully. And with a heavy esprike, the stone ring opened inward, revealing a narrow path carved deep into obsidian rock. Heat poured out, dry and sharp. Not like surface fire. Older. Hungrier. Kael entered. The corridor sloped downward, twisting through tight spaces, opening only occasionally into small chambers of flickering runelight. Old carvings lined the walls, images of flame-shaped figures holding back shadows. Others depicted towers breaking, seas boiling, skies split open. This is what the flame remembers. He pressed onward until the path ended in a chamber carved into a sharp dome. In its center floated a crystal prism, cracked at the edges, glowing faint red. The floor around it was marked with 6 faded circles, ritual glyphs long dormant. Kael stepped forward. The flame bind at his wrists flared, then sank inward, pulled toward the crystal. And then the whisper spoke again. "This is your burden." Kael looked to the side. The figure in crimson now stood beside the crystal, their expression somber. "This is a forgotten spell, once wielded by the Emberbound. Sealed after the collapse." Kael's voice was steady. "What is it?" The figure extended a hand, palm open. "A flame that consumes only what lies." Kael frowned. "I don't understand." "It is not destruction," the figure said. "It is revelation. A fire that burns through illusion, deception, and falsehoods, even within the caster." Kael stepped closer to the prism. "And why was it sealed?" The figure hesitated. "Because those who cast it often could not bear the truths it revealed." Kael looked down at his hands. The fire had always reflected him, his thoughts, his instincts. Was he ready to wield something that might reflect too much? He breathed in, and placed his palm against the prism. The moment his hand touched it, the room went white. No fire. No heat. Just light. His mind cracked open. Visions rushed in. Himself, years ago, standing over his first spellbook, doubting he could ever master even the smallest spark. A memory of the crucible, hearing the fire's voice call him not by name but by truth. His fight with rain. The moment he chose not to finish the duel with overwhelming force, but with strategy. And deeper still, a vision of the fault far below. A second seal. And behind it, something vast. A heart of flame. But not just fire. Pain. Memories. Grief. Hundreds of years of sealed thought, bound into molten magic. Kael gasped, stumbling back. The crystal prism floated in place. Around him, the 6 glyphs on the ground began to burn faintly. And in his mind, new knowledge settled. A spell. A command. A whisper written into his core. Reveal fire. A flame not meant to destroy, but to unmask. To burn through illusion. To show what is. Kael turned to speak to the crimson figure. But they were gone. Only ash remained. A voice whispered one final time. "You carry it now. Be cautious. Even fire has secrets it does not want revealed." Kael exited the chamber slowly, the knowledge of the spell humming beneath his skin. He didn't know yet how to use it. But he felt it. Like a blade hidden in light. Back above ground, night had fallen. Kael walked quietly through the empty halls of Sable, his coat drawn close, his steps measured. Outside, the stars were hidden by clouds. But the flame around his wrists glowed gently, for the first time in days, without him calling it. Lyra was waiting near his door. "You were gone again," she said quietly. Kael didn't lie. "I went to the vault." Her eyes searched his face. "And?" He opened his hand. A single ember floated above his palm, dull red but ringed with silver light. Not heat, not power, but clarity. "A new spell," he said. "One that sees." Lyra looked at the ember, then at him, and nodded. "Then you'll need it soon." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She handed him a sealed note. From the Academy Council. His name marked at the top. And 3 words. Next path trial. Group formation required. Reveal the hidden. The sky above Solstice had cleared by morning, but the tension across campus lingered like a second atmosphere. Something had shifted. Kael felt it in the way instructors paused before speaking, how students spoke in lower tones, how even the wind seemed to carry whispers through the tower corridors. Lyra had said it plainly after handing him the summons. The path trial is no longer just a test. Kael now stood at the base of the Blazeheart Spire, where the council had called 5 students. Himself, Rain Valkyrin, Saran of the Obsidian Guild, Talon the Highborn Elf, and Varric of the Skyburn Scale. The inner candidates. 5 chosen to walk the ancient route. Not for ranking, but to uncover what the Academy no longer controlled. They gathered in silence on a circular platform at the peak of the spire. The wind was thin here, the horizon endless. Stone pillars surrounded them, each etched with flame markings Kael recognized as pre-collapse. The headmaster, Valen, stepped forward. He looked more tired than before. His usually crisp robes were open at the collar, and a flicker of strain showed beneath his calm expression. "You are not here to win," he began. "You are here to see." He turned toward the ancient flame seal embedded in the center of the platform. Beneath the 3rd level of the Academy archives lies a closed chamber. It predates Solstice's founding. No light touches it. No map shows it. We call it the Mirror Vault. Kael's chest tightened. The name rang too true. Valen continued. "Each of you will enter with your team. You will uncover what lies hidden. That is your task." He looked at Kael, and for the first time, his voice carried something personal. "Use the flame that sees." Kael nodded once. Each candidate had been given permission to choose 3 companions. Kael had known his answers before he left the spire. Aaron, Lyra, Duran. The same friends who'd entered the Ember Basin with him. The same people who'd seen him lose control, win against odds and rise despite doubt. Now they would descend together once again. Later that night, as the halls fell quiet and preparation began, Kael sat in the central lounge of Sable Hall with the others gathered around a small magical fire, one not from his own spell but conjured by the dorm runes. "I don't like the name," Doran said, chewing the edge of a dried fruit. "Mirror Vault just sounds cursed." "It likely is," Lyra murmured, arms folded. "If it's pre-academy, it could be tied to the Ember Fault. The timelines match." Aaron spoke while sharpening an arrowhead. "What do we know about the other teams?" "Rain's team is all advanced combatants," Kael said. "He's bringing a wind manipulator and a light weaver. Tactical formation, high mobility." Lyra added, "Saran's team is built around disruption. Expect mana blockers and illusion types." "And Talon, no one's sure. Her power is still untested." Doran raised a hand. "And the dragon guy?" "Varric." Kael smirked. "He's going in alone." Doran blinked. "Seriously?" He said, "I'll need no one to see what must be seen." "That's either confidence," Aaron muttered, "or complete lunacy." Kael leaned back. The ember he had summoned after touching the prism, the one used to channel reveal fire, now hovered above his palm again. Small, steady, watching. And tonight it pulsed faintly, as if aware. The next morning, before the descent, Kael visited the mirror antechamber, the staging floor where the teams gathered. The halls were dimly lit, stone lined with sigils that didn't glow unless touched. Above the entrance to the vault, 6 statues stood, faceless, robed in flowing stone garments, hands outstretched as if warning. Kael stepped forward, then stopped. A sound, not from ahead, from behind. He turned, and saw the figure. A man in a long ink-black cloak. A red iron mask covered the top half of his face. No insignia, no nameplate, and no visible aura. But Kael felt it, like pressure built in silence. "Who are you?" he asked. The masked figure stepped closer, slow, precise. "I am a watcher," he said. His voice was smooth, unhurried. "The flame you carry is loud. It reaches even corners it should not." Kael tensed. "You were listening?" "I have always been listening." The masked man stopped a few paces away. "You walk a path that was sealed for good reason. Not to punish the flame, but to protect it from truth." Kael's fingers curled instinctively. The flame at his wrists tightened. "You're not from the academy, are you?" "No," the figure replied. "But I walk with its blessing." He gestured toward the vault entrance behind Kael. "There are things inside that should remain reflections. If you burn through them, they become real." Kael narrowed his eyes. "And if I want to see them anyway?" The masked figure tilted his head slightly. "Then I will watch you longer." Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he vanished into the shadows. Not with magic. With absence. Kael rejoined his team near the sealed entrance. A glyph pulsed to life on the door, a triangle of flame. "Ready?" Aaron asked. Kael nodded. Doran sighed, adjusting his shoulder gear. "It's never a good sign when the door tries to warn you away." Kael stepped forward. The triangle glowed brighter. And the door began to open. A whisper of stale air swept through the chamber. A scent like old parchment, ash, and something metallic. The path into the mirror vault had opened. And what lay inside was not just darkness, but reflection.